and with some awnings, also increasing the And the third application is on 409 Douglas. This property received a facade grant 4 years ago. The project never went forward. The application has come back to us. It is essentially the same design as before. On the second story, restoring those windows to their full size for the window openings, replacing the kick plate there under the plate glass windows with brick, and then replacing those windows, and then placing an awning. And the one thing that has changed in between 2020 and 2024 is that this building is now eligible to receive a second facade grant that would just allow for the restoration of the leaded prism glass transoms that are there. They are original to the facade. This facade was added, I believe, at the same time as when the Octagon was built. This is a separate building from the Octagon. They do have a unified facade. This building is older, actually, by a few years. This project would be eligible for the separate $23,000 for the restoration of those windows. Restoring those windows is expensive. The glass looks to be intact. If you look at the windows, they are bowing some. It's a very labor-intensive process, and the applicant is not interested at this time in restoring those windows. Instead, he would like to remove those and replace the transom with frosted glass. The applicant has expressed interest in, or stated his intention to preserve the windows and to come back at a later date and to install them. He stated that he does not currently have the funds to go forward with restoring those windows right now. And this building is a contributing resource to the National Register Historic District. The National Register Historic District, however, does not come with any restrictions on what someone can do to a building. So even though it is a contributing resource, that doesn't prevent anyone from making changes such as removing those transom windows. And with the recommendation, or with the alternatives, alternative one is approving the grants as they are requested, and alternative two would place conditions on the grant for 409, requiring the preservation of the windows with the additional $23,000. However, there is nothing that could stop the applicant from removing those windows anyway. The applicant could simply turn down the grant and do as desired.
Could you clarify one thing? I thought you said he would come back later and reinstall the prismatic glass. Is that what you said, or I misunderstood that?
Yeah, that is what the applicant has expressed to me. We spoke on the phone, and he explained that his intention is to preserve those windows and then to, at some point in the future, when he has more funds, to reinstall them.
So he wouldn't proceed with the work behind the awning as shown in the proposed facade then?
He would, but he would just take out those windows, put them in the attic or
Thank you.
And store them somewhere.
Thank you. Questions?
Benjamin, 502 Burnett has the added complication of the stonework coming out into the right-of-way. Is that right?
Yes, it projects out by 4 inches, is what the architect told me. And so the 5 feet of clearance will need to be maintained.
So it says here that encroachment's discouraged, but it's been approved in some cases. Do you know where else that's been approved downtown?
We regularly approve encroachment permits for things like awnings and canopies. Those don't present the same issue because obviously they're above everybody's head, and so they wouldn't instruct the pedestrian clearway. I don't know off the top of my head where something like this, where it's a material at ground level, has been approved. I could look into it, but I don't know off the top of my head.
And is the, excuse me, the facade material applied directly onto the brickwork?
Yes, it would be.
It's-
Mhm.
So is it removable in the future, or does it have permanence?
I assume that it is removable. I got the application here. I assume since it's going, that it will be applied to the facade. um, in the same way that, a lot of stone buildings, buildings that are outwardly, like a costly stone, would have like a brick, construction, and then you'd have this stone applied onto them. That was my understanding. I did not ask that specific question though.
I'm just thinking about the, I think the Pile Photo Building, which had an applied surface, and when they tried to remove it, they ended up having to replace the entire front of the building because the applied material did not come off.
Oh.
This is, am I right that this is not a contributing structure?
It is not hang out. I've got it's outside of the district. So Fifth Street is
Okay.
the district cutoff. It does appear to be in largely its original condition,
Right.
but it is a very plain building, obviously. So there's very little ornamentation.
And with regard to 409,
Mhm.
do we know if those transom windows that are in there now are actually in frames so that the entire frame can be removed? Or is this somehow,
They probably are. I don't know what kind of condition the frames are in. I understand your question. If the entire thing, they would be very delicate, I would think, just because you can see they are bowing in
Mhm.
places, which I would think that, I don't know anything. I don't really know about what it's like to disassemble a window like that.
do you know from the previous application whether there was intent to cover up the transoms? I'm trying to recall that.
Yeah, the previous application proposed to remove them, but that was before we had the additional $23,000 for restoration. So there was, we pointed out to them, it'd be nice if you preserved them, and they
Mhm.
said thank you.
And it's currently behind a plastic
Yeah,
overlay of
there's
some
a
kind of.
plexiglass, yeah, and the same is true. The original transom windows are also present in the octagon, and they are also behind protective plexiglass or a clear material.
Was there a reason given for replacing these other than cosmetic work?
I mean, as the windows, as they start to wobble and bow, they become less weather tight. And so insulation does get to be an issue. And just maintaining them, and, returning them so that they're, not bowing outward, that the lead deteriorates over time. And just a desire to have a window that isn't in need of repair, I suspect.
Thank you.
Other questions? All right, open up public comment. Is anyone who wants to address council on this topic? Seeing none, close public comment. Any closing questions? Otherwise, entertain a motion.
Move alternative one.
Second.
Roll call.
Garten,
Aye.
Junk,
Aye.
Corriere,
Aye.
Rollins,
Aye.
Beatty Hansen,
Aye.
Betcher.
Nay.
Mayor, I'd also point out on this, I mentioned in discussion, the city of Huxley this week announced that they have a program where they're awarding grants of $30,000 for businesses. They've allocated a total of $120,000. These seem like relatively small amounts, and I still would like to revisit the amounts that we're awarding on this. I think that we would see some greater levels of activity and investment if we were to update these amounts. So it's something I'm hoping at some point we can revisit this.
Okay. All right, move on to item number 16, resolution approving the plat of survey and waiver subdivision, 1420 South Grand and 623 South 16th.
Good evening. So with this particular plat of survey, typically staff is the approving authority for this. But in this case, where this was originally platted as a subdivision, access was dictated for the development of the site. And the applicant is asking that with the consolidation of two of these lots, with the plat of survey, that council waive our arterial access standard. And the reason for that is they want to have a right in, right out turn to Grand Avenue. So the main left in and left full access points would be at the designated driveways from the original subdivision. To mitigate the additional driveway, the traffic engineer recommended that a median be installed then on Grand Avenue to control that access. So it'd be right in and right out. And the applicant would have to construct a median to ensure that that is how that driveway operates. So with the condition of the median, staff believes it meets SUDAS. It's a little bit different than our subdivision code. It does meet their engineering standards for management of traffic in that area. And staff is recommending approval of the waiver with that condition. And then that would allow us to approve the plat of survey to consolidate the lots and the applicant to move ahead with their site plan.
Thank you. Questions?
Kelly, is it possible to put this up just so that people can see this? We've got these on our screens, but I don't know if that's possible.
Yeah, if you give me a second here.
Yeah, thanks.
So this is the site plan. So here is 16th Street. Oops, grab that. So south, so 16th Street is here on the south end of the site. Grand Avenue with a shared driveway with cold water is up here. And those are the two original access points granted to the development. What they're proposing is this midpoint right in, right out. And then you can see the length of the median that has to be constructed essentially from the intersection all the way up to the next intersection to manage that right in, right out request.
Other questions?
Kelly, it looks like on this, there is no driveway into the apartments. Am I oriented correctly on this?
The apartments are right here with cold water.
Yeah.
So they have a cross-access driveway that's a four-legged intersection, essentially.
But there is nothing in between.
There is
that
not.
and
There's only one access point to the Grove.
So the median isn't going to impede any other turning activities?
It is not.
Okay.
It is not. The turn pocket stays, so you can turn left at that intersection. It just separates the travel lanes north and south.
And Kelly, at this point, is everyone supportive of the staff's recommendation for alternative one, to your knowledge?
Can I ask who everyone is?
The applicant is content,
It's their request,
but
so yes.
we didn't make any changes that they're unhappy with. They're okay with.
I mean, other than they have to build a median, there's no other way to do it, and they understood that, and they wanted to go forward with this request.
Okay, thanks.
And just to be clear, they are paying for the
Correct.
median.
Correct. It's a raised median, it's a concrete median, it's not paint, it's fully a raised median to protect it.
All right, open up public input. Is there anyone who wants to address council on this topic? Seeing none, we'll close public input. Any closing questions or comments?
It's a great project. We need more of these. I'll move alternative one.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Junk.
Aye.
Poirier.
Aye.
Rollins.
Aye.
Dee Hanson.
Aye.
Betcher.
Aye.
Garten.
Aye.
Thank you, Kelly. Keith, you're up on item number 17.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. So tonight we're going to talk about the Fitch Family Indoor Aquatic Center operating budget. You know, last week we did talk to you about the schedule and also the fee schedule, facility schedule, and fee schedule, which council approved in concept. That was used when putting together this budget. So let's go this way. Just if you haven't been by the site, I thought I'd just show a couple of quick pictures. For anybody that's viewing at home, hasn't been by there, you can see the crane, the walls, the tall walls for the natatorium. There's a scaffolding on to the left of that large wall. That's an interior block wall. And then this was just taken today. So this is Lincoln Way right in front of you, and then showing the south facing part of the structure. So just wanted to show a couple of pictures. So when we were putting this budget together, there's a couple of things that we needed to look at, and should mention that initially when we were looking at this budget, we were estimating maybe $350,000 to $400,000 tax subsidy per year. And as we go through some of these tables here in a little bit, you'll see that it's less than that. And there's a couple factors. We have more information with on the building. We have really been stressing through design and construction, energy efficiency, and really trying to get a lot of things in there that will help us from an operational standpoint. So expenses are a little easier for us to figure out. And you can see the staffing expenses. We use the fiscal year 25-26 payroll projections and a midpoint for temporary part-time employees, utility cost projections received from our consultant. And there is no solar involved in this right now, but we are looking at adding solar to this facility in probably 2026, maybe 2027 at the latest. So that will help with operations. And then we also worked with multiple city departments to work on some of the other internal services that we have. The revenue on the other side, this is a little bit more of guesswork. So we didn't have a municipal pool was not like Fitch is going to be. It's a different facility, so we really can't use that historical data. But when we looked at the revenue projections, we really want to stress that we use a conservative approach with this. We did start with the Furman Aquatic Center passes, what we sold in 2024. But again, we're not sure if the number of passes sold for an outdoor aquatic center is going to translate to an indoor aquatic center. We will sell a number of passes. But what we did is we started with that 4-year average, and then we scaled that back to, again, being conservative. And then we also used the survey results that we shared with you last week to help us with those projections of pass sales. We'll also mention that staff did contact other facilities. We did not find comparable facilities to what we have. If we did find something, comparable, it was hard to dissect their pass sales and things because their fees, because some of them, what they did is they have aquatics, they have weight room, they have gym, they have a lot of different things. So it was really difficult to look at apples to apples. So I just want you to know, and really with tonight, with going through these things, we're sharing this information. We will go through this in more detail when we present the budget in February. So council will have other opportunities to provide input. Really tonight, we're really wanting you to hopefully approve in concept what we're presenting. So with that in place, what we wanted to show is an FFIAC is the Fitch Family Indoor Aquatic Center. For a full year of operation, what we would expect, you can see expenses over 1.1 million, revenues 850,000. And the tax subsidy for the Fitch facility for a full year of operation would be about $280,000. Right? So with this also would mention that we are adding 2 full-time staff members. 2 FTEs. One would be a principal clerk, and then the other one would be an aquatics coordinator. And also mention out of that $1.13 million for expenses, over 800,000 of it is focused just on staffing, full-time and part-time staffing. So that's a good portion. Utilities would be the next largest component of that budget. Now, when we look to the fiscal year 25-26, because of the construction schedule and so on, we're really looking at Fitch would be open January through June of 2026. So what we've done is, so we showed you table 1 was that full year of operation. Now we're looking at 6 months operation. And somebody might ask, well, if it's only 6 months, why are you using 65% of expenses or of a full year for expenses? We will have to hire staff. We will have to train staff. We will have to put water in. We'll have to circulate. We'll have to get the facility up and running. So 65% is roughly 8 months. So really anticipating that we would be having some of those expenses prior to opening. Revenues, on the other hand, would be about 55% of a full year. And what we showed before last week with the fee schedule is we're kind of going with weeks. So the Fitch schedule would be about 38 weeks total. The majority of that, it's not a whole lot, but more than half of the weeks happen in January through May. So that's why it's a little bit more. But you can see now for fiscal year 25-26, the subsidy would be about $268,000 or almost $269,000. Now, what we wanted, so that's just Fitch all by itself. The next thing we want to show is our aquatics budget for fiscal year 25-26 without Fitch included. And these numbers is what we have submitted for our fiscal year 25-26 requested. So this is what you'll see when we present our budget. So just from aquatics, you can see just about $1.1 million in expenses, revenues, 833, a subsidy of 257, almost $258,000. Again, that is without Fitch included. Now, one of the things with our aquatics budget, there are salaries for some of our staff, such as our aquatics manager. Her 60% of her time is going to go to Fitch, which was included in what we showed you for Fitch, but 100% of her time is included in this aquatics. So there is a 60% overlap, so we can actually take some of that money out. And there's a few other things that we have as well. So when we look at the aquatics budget for 2025-6 with Fitch included, you can see the expenses, go up to almost 1.8, revenues just over 1.3. Subsidy winds up going up to $471,000. Okay? So not as much, and I'll show you a slide at the end and compare Fitch alone, and then with aquatics, and then with the general fund. So we did the same thing with the general fund for Parks and Recreation. You can see just under $6 million for our budget, revenues of $3 million, subsidy 2.9. Now, there are some things with the general fund budget that are not in aquatics. Some of our maintenance staff who 100% of the time is in the general fund, none of it to Fitch. Now, some of that will get pushed over. So with this, now this is our Parks and Recreation general fund budget with Fitch included, and you can see our expenses go up to almost 6.6 million, revenues just under 3.5 million. So our subsidy now is just over 3 million, or almost 3.1 million. Now, when you look at all three of those areas, the subsidy impact of the Fitch Indoor Aquatic Center, if you're looking at Fitch for 25-26, again, the 6 months of operation, the subsidy impact would be an additional $268,000. But when we look at the aquatics budget, because we have, again, some of those salaries included in there, we're looking at only 213,000 would be the subsidy impact. And then when we look at the general fund, again, those maintenance positions that overlap. So we're looking for the general fund about $168,000. Now, right now, what we have proposed, or with our requested budget for Parks and Recreation, we're asking for a 1.8% increase in tax subsidy. This $167,000 or $168,000 would be a 5.8% increase. So our total general fund tax subsidy support increase would be 7.6%, roughly. And we'll show you more of that when we get. Then that's if all of this stuff stays the same. So really, again, being conservative on revenues, really trying to take our best guess at what we think this budget is going to look like. And again, we'll just have to then start going out there, and when we get to that point, we're a year out, and we'll start doing at some point advertising, selling passes, all those types of things. And there's some other things that we mentioned to you in last week. So that's just an overview. So any questions?
Keith, could you walk us through the role the consultant has in helping us think through what you just showed us in terms of their anticipated revenues and expenses? Because you're not doing this all on your own, and it'd just be helpful for the public to understand that.
Yeah. So with this, I'd have to go back to with the Healthy Life Center. So we, the city contracted with Ballard and King, and Ballard and King is a consultant out of Colorado that really focuses on parks and recreation, aquatics facilities, gymnasiums, those types of things. So what we did is we took a lot of the information that we received from them and a lot of their philosophies, and then we applied those to putting this budget together for revenues. And they had given us some spreadsheets that we actually were able to use and track all of our expenses and revenues. So that's what we used, but we did as staff really took a look at season passes and what we're doing at Furman and how's that going to translate to Fitch.
But these are very encouraging numbers, and I commend you for the more conservative approach you're taking. We're in uncharted waters, no pun intended, coming up here as we enter the next couple of years of budgeting. And so I think this is really good. I had one minor question really from the last meeting. I posted this discussion on the internet in a Facebook discussion, and I don't remember the answer. Maybe you gave it last time. If not, will people be able to buy a pass for the year that would give them access to both facilities?
Yes. Yeah. So right now, what we showed you was broken down to a Furman pass for 14 weeks in the summertime, and then a Fitch pass for 38 weeks in the wintertime. We will offer a year-round pass, and that will be they'll get it at a discounted rate,
right,
which will be less than if you buy the two passes individually. And we will continue, like I mentioned last week, we will continue to refine, the philosophies and how we do things, because again, we realize that for some people, laying out $725 for a household pass might be too much. So do we break that down to monthly ACH payments, different things? So we'll continue to look at those items.
Yeah, I'm very optimistic. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Just as point of clarification, you say year-round pass, that doesn't imply that they can go to the Fitch all year long and then also go to Furman.
That's correct, because for the reasons he said.
Yeah. So they would get into Furman in the summertime and then Fitch September through May.
Right.
And the
Yep.
725 wasn't what the combined pass would cost.
No,
What was that for?
no, the 725 would be the pass for Fitch. It's again, September to May. The household pass for Furman is 275. So if you put those together, you're looking at about $1,000 for the both passes together. And it might wind up being $950 or $925. We just haven't figured that part of it out if they wanted to buy both passes at the same time.
And your point's really good, Mayor. When we were looking at the Healthy Life Center, the consultant did analysis of our average medium incomes in the community. I remember this discussion. And so there's really a lot that goes into right sizing the price for that.
Yeah, and like we mentioned last year or last week, I think it's worth mentioning again, is one of the things that the consultant told us is price. You need to price your passes at a level that most people can afford, and then find out ways to get the rest of the people into your facility through scholarships and so on. He said the last thing you want to do is price it where all people can afford. You leave a lot of money on the table. So that's what we tried to look at, is where's that price point? It'll be good for a lot of people, but yet knowing that there's going to be people that need assistance. And then it's our job to figure out how to get them into the facility.
Great.
Other questions? All right. This is just a staff report, and is there is there a motion regarding approving or providing additional direction to staff regarding possible changes?
I'd move approval.
Second.
Thank you. That'd be option 1, I presume.
Yes.
All right. Those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried.
All right. Thank you much.
Keith.
Have a good night.
All right, move on to item number 18, hearing on amendment to citywide urban revitalization area designation and plan. Kelly?
All right, so we're back after presenting at a prior council meeting options to enhance the urban revitalization tax amendment, tax abatement incentive for new home construction. We described how our climate action plan goals related to this enhanced incentive, and council's direction was to promote the all-electric home with a solar installation equal to 50% of their projected energy use of the home. We've made that amendment at the language that's proposed. And then additionally, since we've annexed land, since we established the urban revitalization area, we must also amend the plan to add additional territory to the city. So there's 2 amendments to this plan. We were consistent with the direction from the last meeting.
Thank you. Questions?
We have been asked to consider both options on this. And, at the time, we really didn't discuss that as an option. It was either one or the other. And I know that means sending it back, but I hate to have us proceed if, in fact, we're going to end up doing that anyway. So I don't know, does anyone else on council have thoughts about that concept? That was a letter I think we got. And
I mean, I'd be open to looking at doing both.
I mean, we did discuss this in November. Staff did not recommend including both because we didn't feel there was any value towards the climate action plan goals for the dollar amount of the incentive. So option 1, which is effectively the request to allow roughly a $2,200 abatement incentive for an all-electric home, but with no solar. So we just didn't feel that we were buying an enhanced home that really met the climate action goals on its own. And that's why we invented the solar option to really advance that climate action perspective of trying to really reduce the carbon footprint.
okay.
It could be done. Obviously, we have to go back. We'd have to re-advertise and set a new public hearing to do this, but we can obviously have 2 schedules or a 3rd schedule, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good answer. And maybe we can see if it gets taken advantage of once it's in play for a little while and then revisit. So thank you.
Thanks for bringing that up, Rama. Other questions? Hearing none, declare a public hearing on this item to be open. Is there anyone who wants to address council on this topic? Seeing and hearing none, declare the public hearing to be closed. Is there a motion?
Kelly, I'd like to go back to Bronwyn's question just for a moment, if I could. So you analyzed this from a perspective of the cost benefit with respect to climate action. Are there any other ways that we could look at perhaps a benefit for having the combined approach in terms of incentivizing housing?
I mean, we already I think the issue here is we already granted $11,000 incentive for building a house of any type. So beyond that $11,000 incentive for a $500,000 home, we didn't have a rationale for additional incentives beyond the original motion, which was to address the goals of the climate action plan.
But and that's what I'm trying to tease out. So I think you made your point with respect to there's not the cost benefit on for the climate goals, and I'll spot you on that. But maybe there are other incentives that we would have in terms of encouraging housing that would be an alternative justification for doing a combined approach. So I was curious if council, if that's a factor for council, that the climate isn't the only driver of this analysis.
But isn't that the intent of
The whole
the
URA.
tax abatement that was already,
The first tax
that
abatement.
was
Right.
first put in, or?
Mhm.
So I agree with you. That's the incentive for going in.
Uh-huh.
But for looking at the combined, there may be some other additional benefits for looking at that. I don't have an answer on that. I just wanted,
So let me take
Right.
a step back. So the basis of why we looked at this was the climate action plan, but
correct.
the reason for the financial incentive was to cover additional costs. So most people are not choosing to do an all electric home unless they're interested in that option and that lifestyle that they want to have. So the reason for the incentive wasn't to encourage the house, it was to discuss enhancing it to a higher level. So I think the $11,000 is to build the house. The extra money was to build a more expensive house. So it wasn't about it. It's really hard to say that it would encourage any additional housing because it's about a higher cost house. It doesn't lower cost of construction. Like if I know, if I was understanding what you're saying, could we lower the cost of construction and build more housing? Neither of these do that.
Mm.
That's what the $11,000 was about.
Okay.
Entertain a motion.
I would move alternative 1, and can we do A and B in the same motion?
Yes.
Then
Yep.
Alternative 1, A and B.
Thank you.
Second.
Roll call.
Corey,
Aye.
Rollins,
Aye.
BD Hanson,
Aye.
Betcher,
Aye.
Garten,
Aye.
Junk.
Aye.
Thank you. We'll move on to item number 19, hearing on acceptance and submittal of the city's 23-24 consolidated annual performance evaluation report. Caper. Ms. Vanessa.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Before you is our annual report that we submit every year to HUD that highlights any of our accomplishments for the year previous. There were a couple of updates that I needed to make the public aware of that kind of adjusted during the comment period. And that was on page 22 and 23. The information that we got from the Story County Housing Trust Fund and from the Central Iowa Board of Realtors was updated based on 23-24 data. And when it was out for public, we didn't have that data at the time. So they just kind of gave us what they had accomplished for the year, and that's been updated on those pages. Also, there is a specific report that HUD requires us to do. It's called our PR26 financial report. When we put data in, it spits data out for us to help us complete the report, but the data doesn't update until days later. So some of that numbers in that report have updated, but they're still not quite right. So we're going to be working with HUD about that before we submit it, because they'll just make us change it anyway. So that report will have updated as well. So our main accomplishments for this past year, because we were closing out our CARES program, was, again, we were purchasing, demolishing deteriorated housing that were identified by our code enforcement. And also we're working that we had worked with Habitat for Humanity, that 3 houses were built in the Baker subdivision. And then the accomplishments under our home program was that we finally got our LIHTC application approved and submitted and approved by HUD. So those numbers and this report would definitely change for this coming year because we're now kicking off that program construction. And those were my updates, unless you have some other questions.
Thank you. Questions? All right, I'll declare the public hearing on the acceptance and submittal of the city's 23-24 consolidated annual performance and evaluation report in connection with the community's development block grant program and home programs to be open. Is there anyone who wants to address council on this topic? Seeing none, declare the public hearing to be closed. Is there any closing questions or comments? Thank you for your efforts. Entertain a motion.
Move we approve the submittal of the city's 2023-24 consolidated annual performance and evaluation report.
Thank you.
Second.
Roll call.
Rollins.
Aye.
Beatty Hansen.
Aye.
Betcher.
Aye.
Garten.
Aye.
Junk.
Aye.
Corriere.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, move on to item number 20. Second reading of zoning text amendment to allow social service providers in a single-family conservation overlay zoning district with the approval of a special use permit for certain properties abutting commercial zoning. Council, as you're aware, we received a letter informing us of some action taken by some individuals regarding appealing to the ZBA. So I've asked Mark to kind of fill us in on his recommendation on how we might proceed tonight.
So David Carter, who's in the audience tonight, had filed an appeal of a decision by the zoning official, which is our planning director, Kelly, and he had filed an appeal to the ZBA. There is a section of our municipal code, and it's also in the Iowa code regarding boards of adjustment that says that filing an appeal will stay any proceedings in furtherance of that decision by the zoning official. So Mr. Carter had asserted that that means that the council should not go ahead and do the second reading. It should be stayed under that. Now, I took a look at those code sections today. It seems obvious to me that the code sections are meant to keep, staff and, administratively from proceeding to enforce a zoning decision. And it doesn't really stop the council from proceeding with something under its legislative authority. So you're not legally required to stay the second reading. However, it does make some sense. First of all, the ZBA will meet on January 8th, and the next council meeting is January 14th. If the ZBA decides that that this matter should have gone to the Historic Preservation Commission, which has, been what people are asking for, then that puts us into a situation where we have to analyze whether we have to start all over. So it makes some sense to delay this. And plus, there is no harm in delaying it. So even though legally I don't think we have to delay it, I would say, I would recommend, and I discussed with the manager's office and Kelly, and they're supportive of this, I'd recommend that that the council just continue the second reading to the next council meeting, which is January 14th. That will be after the ZBA has issued its decision. And so then we can proceed or not proceed at that point. So.
Mark, thank you for this. Can
Sure.
you walk us through the different scenarios if there were decisions that were adverse to what we've done at these various junctures, what the impacts would be for what we've done?
So if I'm understanding your question correctly, it's, there was a decision that Kelly made, and Kelly, if you want to come up and help me on this, I'd appreciate it. But a decision that Kelly made that this question did not have to go to the Historic Preservation Commission. And so that is the question that's being appealed to the ZBA. I would say if the ZBA says Oh, no, this should have gone to the Historic Preservation Commission, and I don't believe that's what our code requires, and I've already told you that in a memo. Then, I'm hoping that the ZBA would decide that that is the case. It did not have to go to the Historic Preservation Commission. If they decide it does, I think, and I'll see what Kelly thinks about this, I think we'd be looking at starting over on this ordinance, because we would have to take it first to the Historic Preservation Commission and then back to the council.
But even if the Historic Preservation Commission voted in some way to oppose this proposal, that doesn't bind the council.
No.
So that's what I'm trying to tease out, that even in the scenario that's in the best case for the applicant, even if everything falls their way, none of that is binding
The
on,
appellant.
pardon
I
me?
mean the appellant, not the applicant, I assume.
Well, Mr. Carter.
He's the appellant.
All right,
yes.
the appellant.
The applicant was Romero House.
I apologize.
Yep, just want to be clear.
No, clarity's good. So if everything falls in the appellant's way, we're still not bound by any of that, are we?
Right, but the end game is we have to start over. It brings a new public hearing back into play and the option to submit a petition and create a supermajority vote. So you're not bound by anything that HPC does, but it will restart the total process and put the possibly a supermajority vote back into play.
Okay. But we had a
Are new
4-2.
Petition then?
Yeah, and we don't know what ordinance or what you would direct us to restart the process with. So if the ZBA decision disagrees with what I chose to do, which was I chose not to notice the HPC as part of this process, we'll have to restart. You as the council have to decide, do we process the old application? Do we take alternative that we're working on right now as the application to go through the process? You'll have to give direction on how to do that. And then then you'll need a new petition because it'll be a new hearing, it'll be a new application. That's how I believe it's going to work out. It's kind of new territory.
Yeah.
And where does that leave the Romero House? Are they then in limbo?
They're in limbo. There'll be no code enforcement. Basically, the status quo will be maintained until at some time there is a resolution on the request for a zoning text amendment.
But I'm not sure I understand what status quo is. So are they currently able to use the facility?
They can't use 702 Clark, 709 Clark, the yellow house is where they have been operating, and we are doing no code enforcement. They're not doing anything different at that property than when they first requested the text amendment. So they would stay able to keep doing what they're doing at 709, but 702 would be not able to be used for anything, anything besides a residential use.
And from a timing perspective, what's your best estimate as far as if, again, everything falls the appellant's way, best estimate in terms of when this comes back to us?
So I think the 14th. So we'll report to you on the 14th, whatever the outcome was on the 8th. So that would mean either you would continue with your second reading or we would seek direction from council on how to proceed with a new text amendment. And then from there, if you tell us from there, we'll have to go through the hearing cycle. It would probably be a February. If we had to go to HPC, it would go to February meeting for HPC, then to P&Z in February, and probably council the beginning of March.
Well,
If that all has to happen.
My hope is that these other bodies would give strong consideration to the deliberations and decisions that we reached here on the council.
Those will not be relevant to the discussion at the ZBA.
I certainly would hope it would be relevant.
It's a question of whether the language of the code required a mandatory step or not the decision of the council on the merits of the request.
Then with the Historic Preservation Commission, then I hope they're able to take notice of the discussion that we had.
Yeah.
All right. That's all I had.
All right. Is there a motion to continue the second reading to January 14th?
So moved.
Second.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. All right, move on to item number 21, third reading and adoption of ordinance number 4542 for rezoning of 3200 University Boulevard from RI Research Park Innovation District to FSRM Floating Suburban Residential Medium Density with the PUD Planned Unit Development Overlay. Is there a motion?
Move on third.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
BB Hanson,
Aye.
Betcher,
Aye.
Garten,
Aye.
Junk,
Aye.
Corriere,
Aye.
Rollins.
Aye.
Thank you. Entertain motion on third reading and adoption of ordinance number 4543 for rezoning of 3300 University Boulevard from RI to FSRM with the PUD Plan Unit Development Overlay.
Move on third.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Betcher,
Aye.
Garten,
Aye.
Junk,
Aye.
Corriere,
Aye.
Rollins.
Aye.
BB Hanson.
Aye.
Thank you. We'll move on to item number 23. Resolution approving change order. It was Sulzer Turbo Services of LaPorte, Texas. And council, you should have received or did receive a updated item number 23 via email. That's also been posted on the city's website. There were some minor changes to the monetary amounts in the proposed change order. So with that, we'll turn it over to Mr. Com and Mr. Spence. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening. There we go. Yeah. Hey, Mayor, Council. Yes, just talking about this item here. So as you're aware, the combustion turbine failed on July 15th. And we sent the turbine off, the engine itself, to be inspected. That took a little bit because staff had to vet the companies that were able to look at this engine of this vintage. We found that Sulzer had the appropriate accreditation, and so then they did the investigation, went down there and found that it was an inherent flaw within the design of the engine itself. And so now we are asking for this change order to this contract so that way we can purchase another engine. The engine that failed had a lot that was badly damaged inside. And so it was found that if we purchase another engine of this vintage that is operable and then overhaul that engine, then we'll be able to save some funds and have that overhaul performed a lot quicker. So that process will take about 4 to 6 months. This combustion turbine is definitely needed by the utility. And so during that 4 to 6 months, Sulzer has another engine that they can lease to us while they're overhauling. And they have offered to provide that to us the entire time that they are overhauling the unit. And so we're asking that you approve the purchase of another engine, overhauling that engine, and then the funds to lease an engine while that unit is being overhauled.
Thank you. Questions?
So I'm not sure that I'm following this. The CT has a design flaw that has caused some of this. So how does it help us to get another one which has the same design flaw, presumably?
That's a very good question. So yes, the engine that we had there's a number of stages that hold small blades, and it was in the high pressure section of this engine that one of those blades was being held on by a thin root. And because of how thin it was, it cracked, let the blade go, and then that blade traveled throughout the rest of the engine. The overhaul that we'll be performing on this other engine will have a service bulletin design or service bulletin performed where they thicken that rut path, and so that this won't happen anymore.
Could you just clarify, this is not a 5-year-old engine that failed? Would you explain what vintage, you say vintage or this generation, because people might think, well, why didn't the manufacturer stand behind this?
Yeah, so this was built in the 1970s, and this engine has a low amount of hours on it. It has been performing with this thinner root for quite some time. And for us to have another engine replaced, we need to use this vintage because of all the supporting equipment, the generator that it attaches to. It's all built around this 1970s vintage unit.
So I assume there was a cost benefit analysis of looking at another alternative where we would go with a more modern design. And I worry that we're putting, I apologize, $1.2 million into this, into a 1972. At some point, it's time to replace the van, right? And so help us understand why this is not the time to replace the van.
Yeah, we believe that this design is pretty simplistic, and the cost for repair, talking with Sulzer, they are probably the number one company that works with these engines all over the world. And they are also confident. They see that these engines are continuing to be overhauled and produce a large number of hours without failure. And so we believe that this investment is a pretty small investment, considering the replacement cost of a new modern unit that would be able to produce this kind of megawatts.
And so what was the outcome of that cost benefit analysis?
So this cost you is around 1.3 million for us to retain the 17 megawatts. If we were to build a new modern design, it would be 25 to 30 million.
I guess we can keep the van a little while longer.
As long as we don't lose our good mechanic.
Yeah.
And I
Can
guess
you,
we hope they
can you
stay in.
explain what the critical nature also of this, why is this so important to have this one operational? Why do we have to spend $200,000, almost $300,000 to lease, install and replace it for this 4 to 6 month period? Why can't we just risk it?
Yeah, so this unit has a number of different qualities that really help our utility. So one particularly is that it has the capacity availability so that it can produce the megawatts, the 17 megawatts, where we have to retain the ability to produce the amount of megawatts that are utility, which we'll explain here in the next item. It also has the capability of what's called black start. And so if it has, there's no power available, if our transmission lines cannot bring any electricity from outside.
Ever happened before?
Yes. So in the derecho time, all of our transmission lines were unavailable to push power into Ames. And so this is our only unit capable of starting under black conditions. And so that's very healthy for us, obviously. This unit specifically can start very quickly. So if things start showing that we are we're being pretty stressed and we need electricity quickly, this unit would be the one we would go to. We can have it up and running from cold start within 15 minutes. And so that's also something that's very healthy for our utility, as well as this is one of two. There's a CT2, which is very similar design. This unit can operate in very cold conditions. The other unit, we can't operate it currently under 40 degrees. And so having this available is very healthy for us.
And so we have another one that's similar to this. And so has that model been investigated to see whether it has a similar design problem?
So when I say similar, it's a similar design concept as far as a combustion turbine, but it's manufactured by a different manufacturer. It's GE instead of Woodruff, Pratt & Whitney. Was built in 2005 instead of 1972, and so it is a bit of a different situation. But yes, we do keep up with those service bulletins. It does not have the same issues as what this is presented.
Great, thanks.
And on average, do we know those vintage issues? How old is the oldest one operating right now of these engines? No.
They're all the same around this in the mid 70s, but I don't know. I'm guessing to answer your question would be how many hours has one operated?
Sure.
But I don't know that. I know that.
Okay.
So ours has roughly around 1,000 hours on it, which is very, very low amount. Usually a utility will operate 1,000 hours in a year easily. And so, and then you'll do overhauls every so often.
So ours is actually in pretty good condition given the
Well,
years
currently,
because of
it's
the,
not, but-
yeah, it's not at this moment, but not as many hours. So, okay.
Yeah, at the
Which-
time it was.
Which one are you talking about? 2005 one, or CT1 or CT2? CT2 is basically toast, right?
Yeah,
Right, it's toast
GT1
right now.
is basically toast. Yeah, but I'll say that it was operating very well. It was helping us out in the reliability when we had our south tie line go down because of that tornado here in July. That's why it was operating. So.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
I do want to mention too that we've also turned in this project to our insurance company. So some of this will be covered through our insurance, about 750,000 of it, give or take.
That's amazing. And where will the balance come from? I'm looking at the staff report, talks about the
balance is coming from another capital improvement project that we were able to save some funds because of low bidding for that project. It's the Ash Pond project.
So between the insurance, that's amazing. You can get insurance for something like this.
We pay a
I
lot.
need to
for
talk to them about my van. But so they're going to pay $781,000 mackerel, and then the balance then is what we're getting from this Ash Pond CIP account.
And-
so in essence, this is not going to adversely impact our city finances from what you can see at this point.
No, it will not.
That's beautiful.
And to be clear, and we have to pay for the whole thing up front, so we're taking the money out of the Ash Pond. The intent then is when the insurance comes back, what I'd like not to do is deplete that ash project completely of all the funds. So we're looking at least putting some of that money back in there just to make sure, even though we have all of the costs of the Ash Pond covered today, I just don't want to leave that completely barren if there are unforeseen things in the Ash Pond going forward.
All right, open up public comment. Does anyone wants to address council on this item? Seeing none, we'll close public input. Is there a motion on the resolution?
Move alternative one.
Second.
Thank you. And that would be alternative one on the updated item 23.
As amended.
As amended. All right, thank you. Roll call.
Barton,
Aye.
Junk,
Aye.
Corriere,
Aye.
Rollins,
Aye.
Beatty Hansen,
Aye.
Betcher.
Aye.
Thank you. We'll move on to item number 24, presentation, electric services, long-range plan.
All right. Good evening. Curtis and I are going to tag team this, so we're going to kind of go back and forth on some of these slides. We'll also try to be quick, but we also want to make sure that you have all the time to answer your questions. In the last couple of years, 3 major things have happened in maybe 4 even. One of the things is we hit a new peak. We hadn't hit a new peak since 2012. In 2023, we hit a brand new peak of 138 megawatts. Before it was about 126. It was a fairly sizable increase. That alone caused the utility then to pause and say, okay, we are now planning in an environment where our loads are going to start to grow. Item 2, the climate action plan was another major milestone, a major, not shift, but a major focal point that the utility has to say, all right, what is it that we need to be looking at moving forward? The third piece then is as we're moving from a waste to energy type utility to something different, what does that look like? And the fourth one I'd mention is MISO and I'll talk a little bit about that, are making substantial changes to how they look at utilities and the reliability of utilities within their footprint. And I'll mention about MISO. What that caused us to do is basically consider our long-range plan. This goes beyond the 5 years, but we're going to predominantly talk 5 years right now. We're thinking about it from affordability. Are our rates fair, justified, and do they cover the costs that we need? We're going to look at reliability to make sure that our system is reliable to meet all of the needs, all of the challenges that are going to be facing us in the years to come. And third, with the climate action plan and other things, how do we become more sustainable? Hit the slide, please.
So we wanted to start off with just real quick going through our utility history. It's been quite a while. We first started generating in 1896, and I think that was 0.15 megawatts actually for only a brief amount of time. And now currently we're at 28,000 customers, and like Don said, we're at 138 megawatt peak. We use about 630,000 megawatt hours per year. So a pretty fair amount. Just go over our fleet really fast for our thermal generation. So Unit 7 and Unit 8 are our steam units. Unit 7 was built in 1967, has a nameplate of 33 megawatts, and Unit 8 was built in 1982 with 65 megawatts, and they're both currently on natural gas, which was converted in 2016. GT1, GT2, which we were just talking about, GT1 1972, it says 18 megawatts there. It's say around 17 megawatts. Usually you push for those on the really hot days, and so it's harder to get the air through. But so 17 megawatts, and GT2 is at 29 megawatts, and they're both only on fuel oil. And then as far as our green energy, we have 36 megawatts of wind under a purchase power agreement that ends in 2029, and then 2 megawatts of solar also under purchase power agreement that ends in 2038.
So as we look at reliability, sustainability, and affordability, we look at it kind of as a triangle. If you focus on any one area, it's going to impact the other two areas. Or if you focus on two areas, it may impact the third. And so they kind of pull on each other. If we say sustainability is our number one primary goal, it could affect reliability, or it could drive up our costs. Likewise, if we say that affordability is where we want to be, we may have a less reliable system, and we may have less green energy, if you will. So it's a triangle, and I'm not saying that we want to be dead center, but we at least want to understand those inverse relationships between the three. So as we move through, and I'm going to call it an integrated resource plan, but it was predominantly done in-house as we're looking generation mix and things like that, which I'll talk about. There are basically 5 main areas that affect these 3 main drivers. I'm going to talk about MISO requirements, and I'll explain what MISO is. Some would call it MISO, but it's actually MISO. Load growth we'll talk about. The asset health, not only of the generation that you saw up there, but we're also going to talk about our transmission system. Talk a little bit about operating in a post-waste to energy. There are some good things about not burning garbage, but burning garbage actually has created some benefits for the city in terms of reliability by having a generator running continuously. Then we'll touch on the climate action plan, the environmental regulations. And this is, if you're saying, well, why Don and Curtis are you going through this? This is kind of a precursor to when we sit down next year and start talking about our capital improvement plan. It's these ideas, these concepts, these plans moving forward that are driving, I will say, a substantially different CIP than you've probably seen from electric in the past. Next slide.
So Don talked about MISO. So MISO stands for Mid-Continent Independent System Operator. So it has a coverage area or region that expands all the way from Canada, and you can see the map over here with 3 different zones, all the way down south to the Gulf. And I was going to look up really quick on the total megawatts that it's producing right now, but it's not showing me. It's about 89,000 megawatts, I think, is the last time I saw. So there's quite a bit of energy that MISO is working with. Its primary job is to manage the flow of high voltage electricity across its region. It's gets its authority, or it's designated by FERC, which is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So they are the regional transmission organization for its territory. So MISO is the one that provides all the rules to utilities to manage all that flow of electricity. And so when I say all the rules, there's a number of different policies and guidance documents and things that we have to comply with to make sure that it's safe and reliable. And so MISO is the one to do all that. They also provide electricity markets. And so there's a number of buyers and sellers that are providing wholesale electricity. And that gives that that system for us to be able to work with as a utility. And so when we say MISO, that's who we're referring to.
Just kind of some interesting thoughts. MISO's real-time page there, MISO right now is serving 80,436 megawatts. Of that, 5% is wind, 36% is coal, 35% is natural gas, and then there's about 15% nuclear. So when you hear about MISO, it's not, hey, here's this great big wind generator. It's a lot of different energy that is providing the market at a given time. Oh, by the way, the solar was zero, if anybody was curious. So why is MISO important? So we are a member of MISO, as is virtually every utility that was on that map in the colored areas. MISO, because of what it does, it provides a clear, consistent path through the transmission system. So we're able to use other people's transmission. They can use our transmission to move power back and forth. And it's a very cohesive one for all and all for one. The other thing that Curtis mentioned is that they're also a market for capacity, and they're a market for energy. From a capacity standpoint, why this is important is MISO looks at each and every utility and say, everybody is accountable for covering their own needs, okay? So MISO requires that utilities have enough generating capacity. In other words, enough units that have the capability to produce energy. You saw the chart up there that unit 7 is 35 megawatts and CT1 is 17 or 18 megawatts. That's capacity that we count on. We must have the ability to cover our absolute peak plus 9%. So each utility has reserves. So if any one unit goes down, again, one for all and all for one, utilities back each other up and provide that level of security. And that's against our demand capacity. So when we were sitting at a peak of 126 megawatts, you take 126 with 9% reserve and you need so much capacity. What drove us, again, we hit a peak of 138. So we now need, we're I don't want to say dangerously, that's a bad word, but we're getting closer to not having more capacity than we need. We're at that level, which is again causing us to start looking at new generation. Their generation requirements, it has to be proven. So we must run tests to demonstrate that we have the capability to produce the energy we say. It can't just, oh yeah, don't worry about it. It'll be there when you need it. We have to prove it. It has to be reliable. So if you remember a few years ago, we had a period of time when we had boiler tube outages. Every time you have an outage, that decreases your value of your capacity. So even if we had a 65 megawatt unit, MISO through a complex formula would say that is actually worth 50. So we're very attuned to making sure that our units are reliable. So that impacts it. From a fast standpoint, there are two things that we're looking at. We today control all of our generation. We can decide when we turn it on and turn it off. It's called behind the meter generation. And it's great. It gives us the capability to turn on whatever we want and turn off whatever we want because we're adjusting our load. Some of the new requirements is it has to be fast starting. To meet requirements, there are some units that can start in 6 hours, and there are some that must start in less than 30 minutes. We have generation that does not meet those new requirements. Our bigger unit takes closer to 10 to 12. So at some point, MISO's going to say, as a behind the meter generator, that no longer qualifies for capacity. And that opens up a whole new can of worms there. The other alternative is what most people do is we turn our generation over, or we separate our generation from our load, and MISO has control. Good news is you're given more time. If you have a unit like a coal unit that may take 24 hours, MISO says that's fine, but we'll work with you in how it's scheduled. So we are actually looking with some of our units to move them ahead of the meter and give that to MISO control. I'm only bringing it up because it opens up a whole new way of operating some of our stuff. And then firm fuel delivery. I mention this because again, it comes to proven and reliable. If we have a natural gas unit, they want to make sure you've got natural gas and you've got delivery pipes to make it run. If you don't have that, they kind of go, is this really capacity, or are you just telling us this? Wind and solar are not dispatchable. So if we were to build 100 megawatts of wind, MISO says that's worth 16 megawatts. That's the capacity value of wind. If we were to build 100 megawatts of solar, today it's worth 50, but as you can kind of see, our peaks are becoming later and later in the day, so solar has less and less of an impact. They believe by 2040, solar will have zero capacity value to the capacity. Wind and solar are great green energy. The fuel source is free, but from a capacity standpoint, it's something that we're required to meet by MISO. The last bullet there is, let's say we don't have the capacity. There are two ways to meet that. Well, three ways. You build, you can go buy from somebody else, or you can go into, they have an auction. And this auction has been cheap on some years, or if capacity is short, it's very expensive. We could be spending $3, $5, $10 million in trying to replace capacity that if we needed it. So we'd like to stay out of the auction as best we can, because then that keeps us in control of that. Next slide, please. Let me briefly talk about transmission. This is another area that MISO looks at. They want to make sure that everybody can be served with redundancy. We call our desire for reliability is what we call N-2 contingency. In other words, one circuit is out. If that next circuit trips offline, are you capable to serve your load? So we call it an N-2 contingency. Today, this is where our units provide us a tremendous amount of value. We have a unit on. We have a 161 kV line that goes over to Boone Junction substation. We have another 161 kV line, ignore the gray for a second, that goes down to Ankeny. So if we or somebody takes out the 161 kV line down to Ankeny, we still have our 161 and our generator. Our N-2 contingency then is if the generator trips offline, we have one 161. The 69 can only carry about 70 megawatts. So it's a great line to have, but it's not as effective as our 161. So we start planning this way. As we look at a post waste to energy, and our plant is not normally running, and it wouldn't be normally running because A, it's not cost effective at times, and B, we're creating greenhouse gases with it and we're trying to be greener. We have basically, we're down to where our reliability is hurting. And Mid-American actually has an operating guide. So we've been in that situation where we've actually split the city in half so that if one or the other line trips offline, we're only shedding half of our load. So in other words, instead of taking the whole city black, half the city goes black. And we try to avoid that at all costs. The reason I bring this up, and I apologize, I'm getting too deep into this. You may have heard that Prairie View Industrial Park, ITC, on behalf of Alliant, is building a new substation out at the industrial park. That's what the gray is representing. To jointly plan the transmission system, they have asked if they could tap our 161 kV line. Some would say, well, wait a second, they're taking something from you. What do you get out of it? There is some mutual benefit here. By them tapping our line and them bringing in a future 161 kV line, we actually get a new service and a new support into our system. So this is one thing that we're working very closely with ITC to see how we can have a partnership in the substation and then eventually build another line from that substation into Ames so we have more redundancy, again, as we look at a post RDF system. So we're looking at substation ownership, and we're looking at a new line out of there. One of the beauties on transmission is as you invest in transmission, you're actually, by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, you have the ability to earn a rate, a return on investment of roughly 10%. So if you, not saying we just go out and build $10 million worth of transmission and you get $1 million a year in revenue, but the idea is they're trying to encourage the build out of transmission. So the investments we make, we actually get paid back by the general usage of that line by other utilities that are making or benefiting by those lines. So it's not just, okay, we're going to spend money. It actually helps us, and it has a return on investment. Next slide.
One other item that has an impact on our situation is obviously environmental regulations. One particular that we wanted to point out was the EPA's greenhouse gas emission standards. So this was published this last May, and it was really written towards to reduce greenhouse gases from coal combustion. Obviously, we're not on coal anymore, but it does have an impact on any power plant that's burning natural gas as well. And so they're really aiming towards similar emission rates that would be obtained through carbon capture and sequestration. Now, on a large scale, the carbon capture just has not been rolled out much with the utilities, and so that's a fairly new technology at our scale anyway. It also, so existing steam units that go off of natural gas combustion turbines, just high level, basically working to reduce the amount of operation. So the more you operate, the more you have to restrict your emissions. And so our combustion turbines, because they don't often run, we don't use them as often, or they're below 20%. They are impacted minimally, but our steam units will be impacted minimally as well. But if we go forward in building generation, this will be something that we need to consider as well, and how often we continue to generate. There is currently a litigation that's challenging this rule quite a bit. I did point out just main pollutants with natural gas, because we intend on that being our fuel going forward for thermal generation. It's the methane, the carbon dioxide, the nitrogen oxide. The methane and carbon dioxide are under the greenhouse gas emissions.
The other thing I mentioned too, with the new administration coming in, we just don't know if anything like that will change. The quandary it puts us in as we look at these things is the rule is out there. The rule is, it is being challenged, but we don't know what's going to happen come January. So it's not like we can stop planning and say, let's wait and see what happens, but we're at least making sure that we can address in whatever direction we have to go. I thought you were going to do that. Me, huh? Okay. I will be much faster on this slide. So we are looking at load growth. It can come from a lot of different areas: electric vehicles, electrification of homes and businesses, weather changes, new customers. Our current peak demand today is 138 with an annual usage of about 629 gigawatt hours. We're planning right now 10 years out, and we're anticipating a peak demand of 160 megawatts with an annual usage of 700 gigawatt hours. What this slide is representing is one of the things that we track on a 12-month rolling average is what is the combined 12 months of electricity use. And then we just plot that so we can see, Are we growing and shrinking? And you can kind of see some interesting things up here. I don't know how easy it is to see, but that first big dip was 2008 when the economy kind of went whatever. Another dip in there is if you look from a COVID standpoint, our all-time peak so far was back in like the 2023 at 630 gigawatt hours. We're starting to ramp up again. It's been kind of flat, but if you've looked at our weather, which is a huge impact on this, we've had some very mild winters, extremely mild winters. So we're just watching that, but these are some of the things that we're planning for. And we see that line actually, like I said, by 2035, getting close to 700 gigawatt hours.
One of the other items that we wanted to say is just where we're at on our fleet. So our asset health and generation. So unit 7 and 8, we've talked about this a lot. They are getting up there in age. Unit 7, I think around 57 years since it started generating. Unit 8, 42 years. And so their usual design life I put up there is 30 years now. You continue to maintain them as we have and continue to perform overhauls. You can continue to expand that. Now, we are doing a life assessment currently right now. This is not going to tell us we have this many years left. It's going to tell us, hey, in these different primary areas of your entire system, are you green? Are you yellow? Are you red? Kind of thing. And so it's going to help us understand, hey, you need to focus on these things. And then we can consider as staff what we do with that and how we go forward. RDF has been particularly difficult for Unit 7 and 8. You guys know that. The boiler tubes, especially just the environment, combusting the RDF, it provides a pretty harsh environment for the tubes. So both boilers are in pretty tough shape because of that. Unit 7 worse than Unit 8. But then the entire gas path for both of the boilers, it sees a pretty harsh environment. And so all of the electrostatic precipitators for 7 and 8, any of the ducting, the stacks, they see it's pretty tough. And so it's hard to continue to maintain those things. We do that, but the entire structure of those areas are being looked at right now.
Tim, going back to your analogy of the old van with tires and stuff like that, especially with RDF, Unit 7 is one of those ones that we're waiting for the assessment, but we are also then planning for the replacement of Unit 7. We're getting to that point. I can't say it'll be exactly which year, but that's something we may have not wanted to put new tires on the old van in that particular case.
And looking at our combustion turbines, as we've talked about a good amount tonight, GT1, outside the engine here, we're going to be providing a nice overhauled engine in that here after this evening. But we also have a generator and expander that are original. Those were just gone through while we've been down. They look good. They have a health report that is green. And the controls, we have an existing capital improvement plan right now to update the controls on GT1 and GT2. And so those will be sitting in good condition as far as the health report for both of these assets. GT2 is our newest generator, and it's approaching 20 years, but the bill of health is looking good.
In addition to the generation, we also are taking a look at our transmission. We have the two 161 kV lines that head over to Boone and down to Northeast Ankeny. Boone right now, there are several poles that do need to be replaced. So we've got some money in our capital improvement plan to not only replace some of the poles, but also putting up some optical ground wire up there to improve the communication we have between us and the substation at Boone Junction. Our 69 kV system, believe it or not, is on average approaching 30 years old, and there are many points or pieces within that line that are now going to be needing replacement. And again, we're not going to replace the whole thing at once, but we're taking it in chunks and looking at some of the older poles and replacing that just to maintain good reliability.
So one of the items we talked about was what does it look like for beyond waste energy? So, waste energy was a priority for us here and still is at the moment. But it has some ramifications for us as far as how we look at the reliability and the sustainability and the costs. For just as far as its impact for the utility, it's cost prohibitive. What we mean by that is that if the wind is blowing very hard and the wind turbines are providing electricity that is green and cheaper, we have to continue to operate because we need to continue to burn. And so that was difficult for us to follow the markets and be able to utilize that position. It also just a lot of wear on the generating equipment requires a significant amount of natural gas burn because we are constantly on and having to generate no matter what. And then, because we've been looking at this as a city, we're looking at the new alternatives of recycling and landfill partnership to continue to provide an answer for this, for the trash, but then also just as a utility, that'll allow for greater investment towards the reliability and us holding the costs. What we mean by that holding costs is, if we own the assets, then the capacity cost can go all over and it doesn't matter for us. We're able to hold that. The generation, the market energy, that can go all over, but it doesn't matter for us because we can generate at a known cost and then we can turn that off and buy cheap energy in when we want. So that benefits us as a utility.
Okay, touching on some things, because one of the things we talked about is remaining cost effective to our neighbors. So we have just 3 quick charts here. The yellow is Ames rates. So this happens to be the residential. So Ames is rate. This includes everything. This is customer charge, summer, winter. And this is based on data that all utilities turn into the Iowa Utilities Commission. So it's not just us selecting things. This is how they're compared. And this is 2023 data. So I want you to keep in mind that Alliant has recently come out and said they're raising rates 6-7%. I believe Midland Midland Power Cooperative is also raising their rates some amount. So this is even out of date as we speak. But from 2023, our residential rates all in were roughly about 12 cents. You can see Alliant was at 18. Consumers is the dark blue, and they were probably at 13. And then Midland is closer to about 16. So we're very good, very cost competitive from a residential standpoint. Again, and I want to preface that this is what we call commercial. So this could be small commercial and large commercial combined, which are different. Some pay a demand charge and some don't, but it's the best comparison we can do. Again, Ames seems to be the lowest on the block. And again, Alliant and the Midland have talked about new rate increases in 24 and 25. The industrial says that we're one of the more expensive ones. Now, I'll put a caveat in there. If you, let's say, look at Alliant or Interstate Power, they're treating our 2.5 megawatt Mary Greeley Medical Center with a 200 megawatt data mining company sitting in Alliance system that's connected to the 69. So there's a lot of different apples and oranges in here. We have, from an industrial standpoint, we have 7 customers. Alliant, I think, classifies 1,300 of their customers as industrial that range in different sizes. I will say consumers in Midland are similar to us. They probably have 5, 6, 7 what they would classify as industrial.
All right. Given everything we have gone through, thank you for your patience, but we wanted to kind of summarize with some guidelines that we've put together. So again, we have currently 138 megawatt peak in an annual usage of 629,000 megawatt hours. We're projecting a peak demand of 160 and 700,000 megawatt hours. And So our first guideline, what we'd like to do is maintain an ability to serve city's peak load amount with generating units that can be turned on at any time. And so this provides us the reliability as a utility that we want to continue to keep and to hold. And like I said, it also helps us with the cost because we have a ceiling set for capacity and the markets.
And energy.
Or in energy. The second one is under normal conditions, have N-2 redundancy. So Don talked about that. This helps in the reliability as well. We really need to continue to go forward with this being one of our guidelines. Number 3 is keep customer costs competitive with surrounding electric utility companies. So as we consider our plan going forward, we want to have that be our guideline where we can continue to be competitive in that way, using them as a comparison. And number 4, we want to limit overproducing or selling when generating only from green resources. And so this is one item that I think is worth just talking about really quick. So because we live in Iowa, Iowa is a very rich wind generating state. And when it is windy, the entire grid within Iowa gets saturated with all of that energy. And often it has so much energy that MISO will make the energy price very, very low and sometimes negative. So that way people will turn down their thermal generation as well as continue to try to take that energy. So it's not, so there's a home for it. Now, the problem is if we think that if we go out and buy wind generation that is over our demand at the time, and we count on that wind generation to pay back because it's producing electricity, then if we're overproducing into a negative electric market, then what we're counting on isn't there. And so basically, we're not getting the payback on that investment that we thought we were going to get, and we could be hurting ourselves pretty bad. And so we want to make sure that we're not going to set ourselves up in that situation. And then number 5 is serve as much of the city's electric load with green energy without compromising these other guidelines. So these are the 5 overall guidelines that we want to continue to hold as a utility as we go forward with our plan.
Okay, we haven't talked much about green. Let's talk about going green in the climate action plan. So currently we have our green energy generation, 36 megawatts of wind, 2 megawatts of solar. It was mentioned that the 36 megawatts, the contract ends in 2029. We are talking with them about doing an extension of that contract. We'd like some different terms, and they're talking about repowering the units. These sit over near Colo and Ziering. So their repowering creates some interesting benefits and challenges, and then trying to extend the contract and get more out of that could be beneficial. We just want the right terms that benefit the city. We're also looking at ownership during power purchase or doing a power purchase agreement have a big difference. Ownership today, there's the Inflation Reduction Act, which could give us 30% of the money back if that continues under the new administration. Power purchases don't have that. So there's a cost difference in ownership versus power purchase. We're looking at both of those as we move forward. Ownership will require bonding. Power purchases will require us not necessarily to raise rates, but to raise the cost to our customers through a fuel cost adjustment is how that's typically handled. Any generation that we build, especially green, has to go through the Iowa Utilities Commission approval, anything over 25 megawatts. MISO, if we were to propose a project today, there's about 3 years worth of studies, and what they're intending to do is not hamstring a project, but if you can imagine across their footprint, there are hundreds, if not thousands of projects that show up, and they've got to study all of them and then say, okay, these 100 projects impact the transmission system this way, and this is what you have to do. Then a bunch drop out because they can't afford to make the fixes in the transmission system. So then they run the study again and say, okay, this is the new, and then they run it a third time before they give you approval. And it's interesting, the MISO studies could result and they could say, okay, Ames, your wind project is overloading a transformer in Decorah, you have to pay to replace that transformer if you want your project approved. So you get into some very, and it may not just be us, maybe there's 5 projects that have to get in on fixing transmission investments to make it all work. The other thing I'll mention real quick is the RFP process is difficult. We've already gone out for 1 RFP. The way the environment is today, a wind project is sold before it's even proposed. So one of the things that we're looking at, and we'll talk more on this, is we're actually working with a developer that says, I'll tell you what, I'll go and develop a project for you. I'll take up all the costs. And all you got to do is be our partner, have a memo of understanding. And so that allows us to go out to landowners and say, I'm looking on behalf of the city of Ames to build a wind farm, a solar farm. We're under no obligation till we get to a point where he comes back and says, all right, I have a project for you. It's going to cost X million dollars. Are you interested? And then we come back to council and say, here's what we have. Are we interested? He says, you can say no because Mid-American will buy it in a heartbeat. But he says, I want to make sure that others besides, and I'm not picking on Mid-American, but others besides other entities are snapping up all of the renewables.
Before, just to clarify, I can't read this. The wind portion is 11%. This is like an eye test for me.
Yes, I was going to go through that real quick.
Yep.
So the pie chart on the right-hand side today, well, this is a 12-month look, 2023 of November to October of 24. Today, because we're burning garbage, about 52% comes out of the Ames generating plant. We're producing 50% of our energy from natural gas. RDF provides about 3.5%. Our wind right now is providing about 11.7%. We get 0.5% from our retail solar and our own SunSmart project, and we buy about 32 megawatts. 32% from MISO. Okay, and I'm going to come and reference that in a second. Next slide, please. Okay, let's give you an example. And this is one of the things that you will see in our upcoming CIP. We have earmarked a $50 million investment in renewable resources. So let's assume that we want to have ownership in a wind resource into the neighborhood of $50 million. And the Inflation Reduction Act is still in place. It's a 30% return on the investment. That's subject to the new administration. So again, this is an example. A lot of things can change. The cost that we're seeing in the industry with the Inflation Reduction Act money is about $1.3 million per megawatt. So if you take the 1.3 into the 50 million, you can see roughly how many megawatts we can buy. That project alone would get us an additional green of about 20%. So with our existing contract plus this, we're at roughly 33% green in the next 5 years. Okay, yeah, go back. So what does that sort of mean? And this is where it gets really weird. The purple fuchsia, where it says imported energy, that's what our green would look like, roughly that size, pretty darn, it says 32%, would be 33% green. The blue would be what we would be buying from MISO. And then the lime green and the light blue is roughly what we believe we would be generating with our own units, to be there when wind isn't there, and we would probably be called on MISO when it isn't windy and sunny. Last slide, I promise. Okay, so where are we going with all of this? Basically, it's a prep to where is our electric CIP or our capital improvement plan going? 2 things. We're focusing on, if you remember the triangle, reliability, cost, and environmental. Reliability and cost, I told myself I wasn't going to say this word, but there is a large amount of savings that comes to the utility when we stop burning RDF. With that savings from discontinuing RDF, we can start to replace our older generation with new thermal generation. We're looking at 2 to 3 new units in the next 2 or 3 years. We can buy into and have partial ownership in the new ITC substation, which just gives us reliability and another feed into the city. We can build that additional transmission line we talked about, and we can do all of the updates to the transmission system.
I will add, the new generation, you could bring in an environmental element as well, because it'd be much more efficient than what our existing generation is able to achieve.
The beauty, and I'm going to wait till we do the CIP, but the numbers that we're working on with Corey and we shared with the city manager's office, we can pay for all of that without raising rates.
Amazing.
Based on the savings that we'll have from RDF. Okay. The second piece, now we're talking about environmental. And one of the things we're looking at, if you recall from our cost of service study, the consultant came in and says, we think you should be looking at 1.5% rate increases over the next 4 or 5 years. With a 1.5% rate increase over the next 5 years, we also, in our CIP, will be showing you a $50 million investment in renewable energy. And that'll achieve that additional 20% green.
Yeah, and this is an example of what we put in the CIP, but we wanted input from council on what percentage green we should achieve, increase or decrease. So we're just trying to give an idea of what that looks like.
In other words, if you want to be more aggressive, you would put in higher rates to get a greater percentage. If you're concerned about the compounding of the rates on our customers, you wouldn't put in the 1.5, you wouldn't have 50 million in too. So that'll be a decision you'll have to make in the future.
And our goal again today is we're not looking for approval or anything. This is a prep till we get to CIP, so you can kind of see, okay, I remember Curtis and Don talking about needing this transmission or having to possibly replace 7, or having capacity as we grow, or how do we move the needle from where we're at in green today, and how do we get more green energy? So that was our goal tonight. I apologize if it took longer. I did not look at when we started.
So those are the key issues, those 2 big projects. You'll see a substantial amount of money, probably $50 million for the environmental solution. And then it's, what's the other cost? The thermal generation?
Thermal generation is close to $100 million.
$100 million. Now this has there's dominoes here. Remember, we have to work on getting our transfer station, moving garbage off the system and all that. And we're going to do that. So a lot of these won't hit for 2 years, I think, is when we're going to have to plan that. Well, I mean, we'll start planning for it and building it, but it won't be in place until we have our transfer station, we have our landfilling in place, and also our recycling in place and all that stuff.
Right.
Which will take, Brian, I think, is working on that for 2 years. It'll probably take.
Yeah.
We're planning on it. Yeah.
And I will mention, I think Jeff is still here, but this has been brought before URAB, our advisory board that reports to the council. Jeff Witt is the president, chairman of the board. We've already taken URAB through this presentation. We sat down with Corey in finance. We sat down with Steve and Brian. And we're continuing, it's set up so as things change with the administration, as things change with the environment, as things change, we're doing incremental steps, but we're still trying to reach an ultimate point. It's not like, boom, we do one thing and we got to do it all. We're making incremental but purposeful steps.
Thank you. What questions does council have of Don or Curtis?
I'll keep it tight. And there's some questions I can ask offline. I'm going to try to keep these questions relevant to the presentation. I want to test your premise a little bit about the potential for buying additional green energy. So what we know is that counties around Iowa are pushing back on the construction of additional wind farms. And even with the best scenario of adding more solar, it's a huge investment for a very small amount of generation. So could you just speak broadly about the viability? I mean, and we're not the only ones who are trying to go green on this. So all these communities and utility providers are trying to increase their green portfolio. Is that even possible with all of us trying to go after that green energy?
You want to?
You started.
Oh, thank you. It is harder today than it was maybe 5 years ago. There are counties, there are communities that are in favor of it, and there are communities that are definitely against it. Even Mid-American has said they have they're looking at adding 2,000 megawatts of wind, and they said that they're finding it 200 megawatts at a time, projects like that. It is driving the costs up. However, you could look at wind and solar. Solar it does a different impact on the land than wind. You can co-locate wind and still farm around it. So there are many farmers that like that revenue and then are able to farm around it. Solar, they're even actually, Iowa State has a project going on right now where they're looking at what crops can we grow underneath solar panels to see where you'd have beneficial or co-mingle both crops and stuff like that. So those things are being looked at, but there are groups that don't like it. And then there are groups that still support it. It's one of the things that we continue to face as we look at projects and pricing. It's not going to be easy, but it's how else do you meet your climate action plan goals?
Okay. And so that's going to be something we're going to continue to be interested in, is just the viability of that. I have to ask about post-derecho impacts in terms of your philosophy in this. So there were parts of Ames that were without power for, I believe it was 11 days. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that. And so as you think about the goal of reliability, and if you need to go back to that slide, or you can just speak broadly to this. Today, if we were to have a derecho and we had the same variables that we experienced there, how do you think Ames would respond differently now in terms of its ability to keep the lights on?
Mm-hmm. One of the things we brought that up with GT1. GT1 is a black start unit. It was not a black start unit at the derecho. There were things that caused us to do, all three of our lines were hit with trees. Two of them actually lost a series of poles, and that's not something you can put up in a day. Fortunately, the third line stood standing. However, there was a communication problem with the other utility. They were responding to all of their damage. They couldn't send a guy out to respond to opening their side of the switch so we could remove a tree. So we were, just to start picking up the city, we were in a situation that we shouldn't have been in. Black start capability was huge. We've had Curtis and the engineers go through that unit. Short of having a black start situation, they did everything to prove that unit now can do that. That's a huge thing. The other thing is redundancy. So it's important as we look at new generation. It doesn't help if it's sitting in Des Moines. It doesn't help if it's sitting in Minnesota. It helps us if it's sitting here, that get it online, and then we can, if all else fails, if the outside world is down, we could, it may be expensive, but we could serve our customers. With all that said, that helps the greater grid. With some of the customers that were out, to be honest, some of it was a distribution problem. It's not a transmission problem. So when you've got lines in people's backyards, that takes a day just to cut the growth away so you can get back there and get the poles back up. Having above ground power lines in backyards is not the best. We've talked about burying those, which would be a huge expense. And then it would be put in the front yards, and I've talked to a couple of homeowners that say bury it. I said, okay, this row of trees in front of your house has to go for us to get the lines in. And they said, I'd rather keep the trees. I'm willing to worry about the next ratio. So there's those pieces. We have also, though, looked at much of our distribution where we have dual feeds. So in other words, a line will come this way, a line will come this way. We have an open here so that if either section's out, we've done a lot of that on our distribution system. We have more redundancy even at that level. Say one other thing, our AMI system, our advanced metering infrastructure, one of the things you'll see in our CIP is a distribution management system, which will also more quickly locate outages and more quickly be able to operate the distribution system. So that's a piece in the third or fourth year of the CIP that we're adding in that will benefit and reduce some of those outages.
So that's a very encouraging answer, I think, for the community to hear that. As you think about the future demand for Ames, you're taking into account the council's 2040 plan for growth. And what I'm reading in the Wall Street Journal and other sources is that with the move towards all electric homes, electric vehicles, AI, all of these are significantly increasing the demand for electric generation. So are you considering those pieces as you're looking forward in your model of need in the future?
Yeah. Several quick comments on that. So one of the things that's really helping us or is going to help us is time of use rates, is to get, if we can right size and manage the loads, get it out of that critical 3 or 4 hour period, that helps us a tremendous amount. Item 2, the 2040 plan, a lot of that growth is not in Ames Electric. So
that's true.
I want to remind that we're sort of boxed in with our service territory with our neighbors, Midland Consumers and Alliance. So we are considering that too. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say that time of use will be helpful. I mean, all of our systems and our generation is designed, or we're most considered as to when is going to be the highest demand. And so if we can have all of the usage below that highest demand in all the valleys and areas that it's not being utilized, then we're not suffering in any greater amount. And so the time of use is trying to fill in those valleys, and hopefully we can do that. I mean, there's going to be a large amount of electric usage if it is electric vehicles. We think that that'll be easy to push off from that peak amount, and a number of these other items as well as we look at our systems.
Yeah. The other thing I'd say, earlier on, we were talking about all electric homes, and you say, oh, that's going to add a lot of load. Interestingly enough, an all electric home, the heat pump that you would use as opposed to an air conditioner is actually more efficient, typically more efficient than an air conditioner. So the loads actually drop a little bit in the summer because you're using electricity. What it does though is it shifts a lot of the winter loads from natural gas to electric, where our demands are 30% lower, 40% lower in the winter than they are in the summer. So it's really valley filling for us, not increasing our peak demand by building an all green home.
Okay, and I'll be really quick. Just 2 more quick questions, I think. The journal's also raised some pretty serious concerns about grid health. So just briefly, can you speak to does MISO have a problem with its grid? And if it does, will we be responsible? Who pays for upgrading the grid? Is that something that we would be contributing as one of the players in MISO?
Short answer is yes. MISO has gone out. I think we took that slide out. They are proposing what are called tranches, tranche 1, 2, and 3. In tranche 1, they're looking at a $10 billion investment in their northern MISO, where they're going to put in 345 kilovolt lines. The closest one to us is going to run to Marshalltown. So it's Marshalltown, kind of diagonal towards Sioux Falls. That's going to be built. $10 billion. Anybody and everybody that uses the transmission system will pay for that. So we will see, as will everybody else, delivery rates going up a little bit to cover that $10 billion investment. That's tranche 1. Tranche 2, MISO, and this is 10 to 15 years out, are proposing not 345 kV lines, 765 kV lines. huge monsters. And I can't remember the cost of that tranche, 34 billion, something like that. And the idea is to build a very, very strong infrastructure. And you'd say, well, they're just going to ship all of our wind to Chicago. But the idea is when the wind blows, sure, send a lot of it over there when we have too much. But then at the same time, when it's not windy, there's a lot of nuclear sitting over in the Chicago area. Bring that back. So MISO itself is very much aware of the transmission investments, and that supports the greater grid and keeps it.
And so just to land the plane on that one. So are we considering those potential increases for those various investments in the grid? Are you layering that onto your modeling? Or is that something that's going to be different?
So, for example, the only thing that directly individually benefits Ames would maybe be that 345 that comes into Marshalltown. We are looking at what the costs may be, but we haven't seen any representation from a cost standpoint how that'll impact us, but it'll impact everybody the same. How it supports the system, it only stiffens the new line that comes into Prairie View, but it also stiffens the line over to Boone Junction. So it will benefit that. I think, is that your question? Will it benefit?
Yeah, no, I'm not disputing the benefit. I'm just wanting to make sure as we think about the impacts for our electric users, I just want to make sure that we're including those potential. I mean, 10 billion is a lot of money. Even if you spread it out, there's going to be impacts on our consumers. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding your answer right, that you have baked that into anticipated increases, or is that something that would be added on later?
Because we don't know what that number is, we don't know if that's $1 a megawatt or $10 a megawatt. We have not even seen impacts on rates. So that is outside of our scope, outside of our planning.
And so just remind us as we go through this process the next couple of years that we know what we know and we don't know what we don't know, and just keeping that variable out there, because that may be something that's layered on to our consumers. And finally, I love the diagram. I don't know that I've seen that before with the reliability, affordability, and sustainability. A lot of attention has been placed on Germany, and just they're probably one of the most aggressive markets trying to move towards a green energy system.
Mm-hmm.
And your point was so well taken with that diagram, because their costs are through the roof right now, and that's a strategic decision. So there's a lot of examples we have out there that move the needle in different places, and I love the way you frame that, and I look forward to getting input from the community on that. But just the fact that we are able to have only a modest increase and yet do the things that you've outlined on behalf of the consumers in Ames, that's fantastic. So I'm super encouraged by tonight's presentation. Thanks.
I wanted to add there on your comment about just what the variables were on impacting us, our ratepayers. We're looking at the current situation and things, and there's a lot of retirements of generation happening, and then there's a lot of aging infrastructure. And so I hope that you saw that within our presentation tonight, is that we are really wanting to invest in our infrastructure, and we are wanting to continue to protect from that cost increase within our own control. And so by us owning the generation, we can have that control, and then us investing in that transmission like we are, we have that rate of return, but then we also have our grid in a pretty healthy situation.
Yeah.
Other questions?
I will say it goes without saying that having a municipal electric utility in Ames is probably the best thing that could be for the city.
Yeah.
We're not biased.
Having a third party, though, right now it's city council, it's our customers, it's URAB, that we have direct control in what you want the utility to be focusing on.
Can you just clarify what kind of information or what kind of format will you be providing to council to help them answer the question, what percent of green should be increased or decreased? Because there seems to be a lot of variables, including, you showed that MISO is derating solar for sake of discussion. So if you went to solar, in a few years, you may have to say, well, we may have 50 megawatts of solar, but we can't count that at all towards generation, right? So we got to build that duplicatively, having another generator or two for sake of discussion. So will all that information be put like in some kind of a matrix or a chart? Because I think it seems to be a pretty complex question that needs a lot of information so the council can make. It'd be easy to say, oh, we want to be 100%, but what are the implications for that?
Yep. And to your point, in a nutshell, and we can go in much more detail, I won't do that tonight. Historically, a utility would sit down and say, okay, we need to build more generation. Is it going to run a lot? You build a base load unit that's expensive to build, cheap to run. Is it going to run a little? You build a peaking unit that runs, it's really cheap to put in, but man, you're going to burn a lot of diesel fuel or natural gas or whatever. The world has changed. You now look at capacity. Okay, this is that whole MISO capacity slide. How do you meet that? Today, you meet it with thermal generation because you can turn it on and turn it off, or batteries are going to be a thing of the future. You store it and when you need it, but batteries today are not cost effective. So that's how you meet your capacity. Wind and solar do not meet your capacity obligations. Then you turn and say, okay, how are we going to meet our energy requirements? And that's the area you could say, well, if I want to be really cheap, I'll just burn natural gas. But that completely ignores the environmental component. So then you say, all right, I purposely want to be more green. How much wind makes sense? Wind, there's a lot of wind in April, not a lot of load. There's not much wind in July when it's 100 degrees. So you have to right size the wind and maybe have some storage with that. And solar is great at noon. It's terrible at midnight. So you got to choose how much of that makes sense. What we'll do is we can lay that out for you is focusing on how do we meet our energy requirements. This is how you do it with wind and solar. And you can do it with ownership, which has pluses and minuses, and you can do it with power purchase agreements, which have their pluses and minuses. And we can lay that out for council. So you could say, okay, I want to go another 10% green. This is how much wind and solar it's going to take.
All right. Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm sure you could go on for a lot longer. We're not going to let you.
We're sorry. Thank you.
No apologies. I think this is a good foundation because we know that we've been told there's going to be some different projects in the CIP, so it's a good foundation to build upon. So thank you for the thoroughness and for the presentation. It was very informative.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's just take a quick 5-minute break and then we'll move on to item number 25. All right, we will proceed now with item 25, budget guidelines. Corey, Nancy, Pa, Brian, welcome.
Yes. Bring it home.
Sorry, I should have realized that earlier. It's that time of year where we're in the process of compiling our budget, and I think it's time to have some conversation about a few of the items that they're incorporating in the budget and get some direction from council in terms of service increases and decreases. Report back on some of the outside funding requests from Asset Coda and then other organizations. So we have a presentation tonight, very similar to the last few years, to talk about some of those assumptions and kind of where we're headed. There we go. We showed this graph last year. This is a graph provided by the league, and it reflects the rollback on property valuations. And I think the highlight that you'll note is in the red box in the bottom is that the residential rollback for the upcoming year is at about 47.5%. So you'll notice last year there was that big increase in taxable evaluations, which drove the rollback down about 8%. And so that's directly reflected in that graph. But you'll see we're kind of back into normal times, just seeing minor adjustments in the rollback. So that's really the intention of that graph, is to show that we expect our residential valuations to be similar to what they were in the previous year. So if you recall, last year was the first year of the 2023 property tax valuation changes, and the state legislature implemented a tiered system for valuation limitations. And so House File 718 that's impacting our current budget had 3 tiers. And it also combined several levies that were historically available to cities into what's called a combined general fund levy. And that's what the CGFL is. So under the current system, or the 24-25 system, if taxable valuation growth was less than 3%, you could go up to $8.10. And that's been historically the standard. If taxable growth was between 3 and 6%, revenue was decreased by about 2%. So we had about 4.6% growth last year. So that really reduced us to about 2.57%. So we fell into that second tier last year. And if you're above 6%, it decreased your taxable revenue by about 3%. So as part of the 2024 legislation, they implemented a 4-tier system, and we don't have our taxable evaluations yet, so we don't know where in that 4-tiered system we're going to fall. I think the assumption is it'll probably be somewhere between tier 2 and tier 3, but we should know that probably in the next 30 days or so. So this is a complicated picture of how you get to the consolidated general fund levy. And I think the point of this slide is not to quiz everybody on how you get to that rate, but to show that it's a little bit convoluted. And I'll just give you a really quick overview minus the arrows. So you take the revenue received last year on property tax, and the denominator of that equation is the taxable value from the previous year. Because we grew 4.6%, you multiply the denominator by 2%, which is then divides what you received last year in taxes. So that gets us to $6.21 per thousand. And then you apply that rate to your new valuations, and that's how you get to what your maximum revenue is under that calculation. So that gets us from the 4.6% to the 2.57%. So when they say it's about a 2% reduction, there's much more than just reducing your valuations by a straight percentage. It's an equation that we're not really sure how we got there, but that's what we've got. So some additional changes that came with the 2023 legislation was an increase in the military exemption from $1,852 to $4,000. I think the highlight of this is that the military exemption, was previously funded by the state. The legislation removed state funding for that and forced the obligation on the city. So we expect that decrease in revenue for 25-26 to about $19,000.
Would you just clarify for anyone that may be watching, when it says from 1852 to 4,000, what does that mean?
Yeah, so that's the amount of valuation that the city's levy does not apply to anymore. So that's a tax credit or taxable exemption, basically, for residents that were eligible for the military exemption.
So what would that translate in terms of a credit for, like, how much would we lose in revenue for one person, for sake of discussion? Is that like,
I don't know. Let me see. About $20, I think, $20-ish. That sounds right.
It's not $4,000 in
No.
tax credit. It's actually $4,000 off the assessed valuation that is not exempt from taxes.
Yeah.
Right.
I think there was some confusion about that. And the 65 plus credit last year, people expected their tax bill to go down, 30, I'll go to the next slide. They expected it to go down $3,200. That's not how the equation works. So, that was a little bit confusing. I'm sure Sherry in the assessor's office had some things to explain, but that's just not simply how the calculation works. So this is onto the 65 plus exemption. It went from 3,250 to 6,500. That's theoretically the highest it'll go under the current legislation. We had a slight increase of about 64 in exemption applications, and we expect the decrease in revenue to be about $90,000 next year.
So the takeaway on those two slides, the state's wanting to be generous, but they're being generous on the backs of cities.
Yeah, I think specifically the military exemption, where they had funded it in the past and then provided it to us and increased it. So very generous. Unfortunately, it affects our budgets and reallocates those costs to other residents. So I think we've talked about this, at least I've talked about it the last 3 years. I'm sure Dwayne did a couple of years before, but there's a phase out of the backfill. There was a 5-year phase out. This is the 5th year we expect a decrease in revenue of about $195,000. This will be the last year of that, unfortunately. We've been pulling together as we some of the information, and as we look at last year, the availability of funding for one-time expenses. So we ended the last year with about $16.9 million in fund balance. We had about $1.1 million of surplus in revenue. That's largely composed of interest and capital and gains on our investments, as well as local option sales tax increases. We had expense reductions, or spent less money, about $5.6 million, but about 4.6 of that was carried forward for capital projects. So when you combine all those numbers, we had about $2.1 million in net available balance. And I think, like we've suggested in the past, that we utilize those proceeds to fund one-time expenses and don't add them to the base of our expenses that may cause issue moving forward. We should have more, we'll have more information about the savings from the current year budget by the time that probably late January, early January, something like that. So we expect that number to go up, and we'll have more concrete numbers in the future there. This is the third year of the ARCH program. It's a two-person team that responds to 911 calls. The request this year from Mary Greeley Medical Center is $130,000. That's about a $28,000 increase from the past year. I think the difference is Iowa State's contributing $30,000, so they're joining the program. The city's contribution is about 48% of payroll and benefits of the staff. So. Barb will be here during the budget to talk about Cyrite a lot more, but just a quick highlight, they're about 85% of pre-pandemic levels. They've got some electric buses in service with more on the way. I think the real highlight and the reason for this slide is they're requesting a 2.5% increase over their 24-25 budget for the upcoming fiscal year. So just over $2.2 million. I think, are we still there? Sorry. On to utility rates. When the water pollution control facility was approved, staff came forward with a different way of looking at our rate increases. So historically, water and wastewater rates have been alternated in terms of increases. And as we were considering that project, given the increased cost, we identified the fact that annual increases of a smaller nature to each utility were beneficial. And so I think at that time we recommended a 5.5% increase for sewer and a 3.5% increase in water. And we're still projecting that those will meet our debt obligations to fund those two significant facility projects in the past. We believe the impact on the median residential customer is $2.85 a month. Once we get further along in the budget process, we'll come back with what that means to other customers. But I think that's a pretty good indicator of the impact of those rate increases. Spent some time with Don tonight. So you heard about the 1.5% recommended increase to utility rates. I think the highlight of that is for the median residential customer, we expect that to be about $1.20. And as Don mentioned, that's really a result of that rate study that we completed 6 months or so ago or something like that. So we're planning on sticking with that to support renewable generation, or recommending that to support renewable generation. And I think the real highlight that you probably talked about tonight was the transition away from RDF will have significant financial impacts on the utility going forward. And our understanding right now is that those savings will provide enough capacity to support investment in additional generation. So there's a shortened version of what Don gave you tonight. Last year at this time, we recommended a 20% increase in tipping fees for resource recovery. Those are currently in place. At this point, staff doesn't recommend an increase in tipping fees or in the per capita amount. Last council meeting on the 10th of December, Brian and the public works staff presented alternatives for municipal solid waste. And so as we get further along in that project, there'll certainly be a lot more discussion on what that means for the per capita and tipping fees. But at this point, I believe our intention is to have in some capital costs, maybe for facilities and design and land acquisition, but there'll be a lot more evaluation in terms of the impact on the finances as we move forward. We've got a number of stormwater projects backed up at this point. So I think we have about a $7 million balance. About $4 million of that is carryovers from previous years. It seems like another opportunity to catch up on those. And so really that doesn't necessitate at this point a rate increase in the ERU for a stormwater utility, at least we believe. Now I think the next few slides kind of show some of our financial forecasting for some of our funds. As a reminder, hotel motel taxes, 7 cents per dollar. 5 cents of that goes to Discover Ames, then 1 cent goes to replace the lost local option sales tax, of which 60% goes to property tax reduction and 40% goes to community betterment. And then 1 cent goes to the hotel motel tax fund for economic development. So the top two bars you'll see are actual collections for FY 22-23 and 23-24. You can see a slight decrease there at the completion of our last fiscal year, about 4%. We're projecting just a modest increase at this point based on the revenue that we received so far and some of the state projections. So going up just slightly in the adjusted 24-25 budget. And then I think we're budgeting pretty conservatively for 25-26, essentially keeping it the same. The 25-26 budget would be a 3.8% decrease over the adopted budget. So I think we're trying to be a little bit more conservative, particularly with this revenue source, given our past history of collection and some of our budgeted numbers. The road use tax fund, a large source of street operations and construction. You can see from 22-23 to 23-24, we had about a 2.2% increase. At this point, about halfway through the year, we're forecasting just a modest increase, about 1% in the adjusted 24-25 budget. And then again, just another modest increase in road use tax for the upcoming fiscal year. 25-26 is a 2.2% over the adopted budget, so 9.3. So just a slight increase there. Not much to talk about. I think the highlight probably of our forecast and probably the biggest mover in the last 4 or 5 years is local option sales tax. We've been a beneficiary of significant number of, increased sales within the county. We increased about 7% from 22-23 to 23-24. We believe we're on pace at this point to get about $12.4 million, about 3.3%. And I think to budget fairly conservatively, we'd look at projected 25-26 budget of about $12.4 million. So that still equates to a 3.3% increase over the 24-25 adopted budget. So still pretty aggressive, I think, in terms of what we're seeing for sales tax.
And Corey, just a comment on that slide alone. When the legislature talks about the possibility of phasing out city's ability to have a local option sales tax, people need to look at that slide and contemplate the impact for Ames. So just, it would be hard for me to restrain myself tonight, but I wanted to offer a couple of comments of the impacts of potential policies that are being discussed.
Yeah. Well, and I think the important part to recognize is what 60% goes to property tax relief. So, if that were to go away, that's a material impact on our property tax collections, particularly if we're capped at whatever slide number 3 said,
right?
4 or 3%.
Yeah, just to be clear, that I haven't heard of them saying it's going to go away. They have talked about possibly making it statewide. I think the concern is that, and they have said that they would try and keep us whole, is just what would happen down the road. So I don't want to become you need to be careful that we don't give the impression that's what they're talking about right now. That's not what they're talking about. But local option sales tax has been talked about over the past few years at the legislature.
Yeah.
And again, it's just, we saw what happened with the backfill. Oh, we'll make sure that you're kept whole, that you get the same amount. But to your point, if they do start to tinker with it and start saying, well, we're going to take some of that away, that's going to take 60% of whatever's taken away is used to help reduce it. And when they're putting pressure on top of our potential levy rate, we could be put into a pretty challenging situation. Right now, it's all speculation. But we do know there's going to be some legislation being proposed that may be impacting a number of factors. But I just want to clarify that they have not. I have not heard of anything. I'm not sure if you have, Corey, about them taking it away from us. If they did, that would be disastrous for the city of Ames. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think all revenue sources are on the table in terms of conversations. And so I think that's in all likelihood where that conversation comes from. I don't know taking it away, taking it away is not good for the state either. So,
Yeah.
There's a lot of conversations going on about that, and the distributions and allocations, I think, is probably the main topic. Yep. So just a couple informational items. This is kind of interesting. I don't think we've shown this in the past. This is the taxable sales, the number of returns and computed tax by categories set by a national retail operation. So I don't have specifics of what goes into those details, but you can see Story County generates about $21.5 million in computed tax. Largely from eating and drinking establishments, some general merchandise, miscellaneous items, and then of course services. So just kind of interesting data, I think, to see number of sales that occur. And then I think the next slide is the one I think that is maybe a little bit more consequential for us. So what this attempts to show is that about 86% of sales in the county are generated in the city of Ames. And through the state distribution formula, we get about 61% of the total collections in Story County. And I think if you look down that list, most of those are probably proportional between some of the smaller communities in Story County. I think the one that you'll notice is a little bit askew, maybe, is the unincorporated areas. And that's primarily Story County. And so as you look at the distribution, and we talked about maybe changing that formula, I think that's one area that the city would advocate and say that we should be receiving something closer to what we're generating in terms of sales tax. And that's a controversial topic to counties. So you would expect some feedback that may not be supportive of that. But certainly kind of an interesting statistic you see with a large, a county seat, particularly in other areas. I know Ames isn't, but where all the commerce takes place. So it's not just happening in Story County, it's happening across the state too. Strange distribution formula. The city participates in 2 pension systems run by the state. MFPRSI is for our public safety employees largely. The contribution rate from employees is about 9.4%. It's increasing slightly from last year by about 0.02%, largely to some actuarial adjustments. But the returns in the system, I think, in the past year have been good, which has been able to hold that rate steady. The IPER system is not recommending any changes for next year. As part of our budgeting process, we meet with Human Resources and Bethany's team and take a look at our fund balance for our health insurance fund. Last year, we recommended an 8% increase in rates for all plans. I think we're sticking by that recommendation again for this year. A big portion of the driver of that recommendation is the use of insurance in our medical claims. So just trying to make sure we have adequate fund balance to comply with the state requirements related to our health insurance system, given that we're self-insured, and then also just making sure we have adequate fund balance to make payments and continue to make our payments to our carrier. We're in the process of the first full year of savings from our PBM, and I know there's been a lot of discussions about some of the challenges with that. I think we have realized the savings. I think we've fallen behind maybe in our expectations of customer service, and Bethany and her team will be bringing some information forward. But I still think even whether we stick with the current carrier or we continue with a different one, the savings opportunities still exist there, and we really are realizing some of the efforts of that change in the last year. As part of Steve's letter and in the capital improvement plan last year, 5 capital projects were identified to focus on. They were the animal control shelter, a new animal control shelter, relocation of fire station number 2, development of the park in West Ames, indoor recreation, and then a new fire station number 4. And I think those are still priorities. I think in the coming budget session, I think we need to have understanding of council of the funding strategies for each one of those projects and in all likelihood, the prioritization of those projects. And I know if Steve, you have
Yeah, probably.
insight to that.
I don't like to put something in the CIP we're not serious about moving ahead with. So I don't believe the council wants to put all 5 in 1 year. I think my recommendation in listening to the council in previous discussions, it appears that the animal control, to me, I'm getting feedback that the animal control shelter, which is the existing building that is outdated and inadequate, would be the top priority. So probably you'll see in the CIP, the animal control shelter. Now, you also have given us money to develop conceptual costs for the relocation of Station 2 and the development of the new park out on West Ames. We don't have any money yet for the new indoor recreation center as far as developing conceptual costs, although we will visit Nevada and we'll get some ideas of comparable costs, square footage costs, maybe help us with estimates. And of course, new fire station 2 is predicated on the amount and how fast and how far we grow over the coming years. But what I need to know is I'm going to put together a project. If you want to see the project in the CIP, we have hired a consultant to work on the new animal control shelter. And at that time, we thought we would work on a new building, give you a conceptual cost. But Brian and his team have identified an existing building. I think he's kept you apprised of that. We have a purchase option out. And then one of the first order of business for our new consultant would be to develop estimates for renovating the cost of the facility, of that building, into a modern animal control shelter. Now, the purchase price has been locked in 1.1 million about. So we're thinking with that and a renovation cost, and we don't know the exact cost yet. Hopefully closer to February, we'll know. It would be a lot cheaper than building a new building. But what I need to know is, as we pursue this project, you can finance it out of 100% donations, which some cities have done, 100% donations. You could provide funded 100% out of property taxes. That will require a vote, right? A GEO-bond vote, 60% approval. And finally, you can use some, I don't know how much we'll have. We have about $3.5 million available in the newly created City Council Capital Improvements Fund we created. Do you remember that? It was savings for general fund money. Now, all I need to know, is there any percentage or areas that you don't want us to include as a funding source? Or you'll say, I don't want any property tax money to go into this. I want it to be donations and take it out of that balance of that fund. Or I want it all out of donations, or I want it all out of property taxes. Any thoughts you have on that? Because that'll help me develop the actual project sheet itself. And I understand the estimate could be anywhere from $4 to $6 million, if you want to look at it that way. Any thoughts on that? So it can help me give direction on it. And we'll adjust it when we get the final. The trouble is you got to prove your CIP in February, and we're probably that's about the time there's going to come in with the estimates.
So your specific ask is just not percentages as much as it is.
Well, better say percentages, because we don't know the actual dollar. It could be
Right, but like, do you want to use, for example, a third of money on hand, a third of donations, a third of tax, or 100% property tax, or 100% donate? Is that's what you're asking council for feedback?
That's
on?
correct.
Just essentially an initial pardon the analogy, but initial guess essentially.
That's correct.
So I agree with putting the animal shelter at the top. Our facility is not addressing the needs of the animals as well as it could be. They're doing a valiant job, but I agree with putting that at the top. I also think that if we are trying to fund it with donations primarily, it could slow the process of getting that new shelter done. And I think that we've also seen what happened with the mini pitch when we said we don't want to do fundraising, and then the price came in much higher than we anticipated. So my feeling on the animal control shelter is that we need to do the project. we should take money from um, the council capital improvements money and say we are committed to using that money, but we are not cutting out the opportunity for donations. Sort of like what you did with looking at the Fitch Family Aquatic Center and saying we aren't going to include the money from the Downtown Reinvestment District. We're going to make sure we have the funding, but if we can use that money later, then that's cream. So I would say the donation should be viewed as something extra that we are not absolutely dependent upon because we need to build or enhance an existing building to provide a state-of-the-art shelter for our animals. Those are my thoughts.
However,
It doesn't
with the-
give you
with the-
percentages.
With the Fitch, though, they did go out and do fundraising concurrent with, some bond issue money. It wasn't just like, I agree with the sales tax, rebate. That's cream on top. But I think if you say we're going to fund it all with cash on hand and hopefully donations come in, well, that's going to make probably not much of an incentive on people to go ahead and donate. And then the other thing is that we have adequate money on hand to pay cash for that. And then how would that impact other projects that maybe council wants to prioritize too?
Well, I guess I do not want us running short on donations and not being able to do this project. And to me, the way to do that is to say we're committed to this funding and we still do the fundraising to go along with it. And we hope that people understand that donations are important to the project, but that we have to build this. And others may disagree. I just don't see it as an option for us to wait to do that shelter project until we have donations in hand. And, maybe people won't be generous. Maybe they will say, oh, the city's paying for it, I don't have to contribute. But I like to think that we do have donors within the community who would support this, even if the city said we're committed to funding it if we don't get the donations.
Other thoughts?
Is there any idea of how other cities our size approach that number? I feel like it's just difficult to
The number itself or how they financed it.
for how to finance it and what percentage.
I think that
might be
police chief did
fundraised.
some preliminary investigation for us and it varied, but a lot of it came substantially from donations. But not all. They're mostly there's some are combinations.
Mhm.
Well, a lot of city shelters are private
And they're
nonprofit.
our county.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So ours will be unique, fairly unique. We have a county and a city shelter.
One important piece, if we're going to do the fundraising, and I would support some kind of combination. The reason why we had the robust fundraising on the Fitch Indoor Aquatic Center was because of Dan Culhane. So he was a work of a force of nature to encourage people to be generous. And so we would have to find someone or some organization to really lead an effort to get any kind of measurable donations.
Right. I will tell you for the fire station relocation, number 2, remember, I think we have an agreement with the president of the university that if we sell that property, and we're looking at leasing land on their property on State Avenue, that we would direct, if you want to, the proceeds of that sale, half of it would normally go to the university, would be directed towards the new fire station. So that would reduce a bond issue. But it probably won't be enough to cover the whole station, which could be $5 million, but it would make a significant reduction in the obligation. It would take a vote, a GEO bond referendum, okay? Development of the park in West Ames, again, that could be done in phases. That could be done with a vote. The mayor was discussing today some balances we have, maybe in the local option sales tax fund that you could do to maybe do a fourth of it to start off with, right? To get people excited about it. So we could look at that. And now the recreation center will be more problematic. I mean, we're eventually going to reduce all of our sources of revenue, although I hope we have savings in this year's budget and last year's ending last year, where we're going to replace some of that money in your property or your project fund that we just talked about. We'll see when we get there. And then of course, Fire Station 4, that'll be a little bit more in the future, I think, as we grow. So we'll develop some strategies for you. We hopefully in all those we'll be able to reduce the amount that's needed. So 100% is not going to be needed by if there's any kind of referendum. But I just want to focus on what you want to move first on and concentrate on that. You can have an election as early as November.
So could you clarify on the relocation of Fire Station 2? Is that a must-do right now? How help us think about
We've talked about that for many years.
Right.
For the danger and the safety of the people, that area has become highly more dense than it's ever been. We're really concerned about the safety of people out there, especially on weekdays and weeknights when people backing in and backing out with a fire truck. Secondly, the facility is outlived its useful life. It's been there for many years, so there's got to be a substantial investment in that. If you want to do that, it's not the right place to invest in it. And thirdly, by relocating it a little far west and south, it actually improves our response time.
I mean, it's hard with Fire Station 2 just because it is a public safety issue, and I feel like that puts a lot of weight for us in that. I come back to this new indoor recreation center. This community is long overdue for having this, and I continue to go to the gym and find it just packed, and we're not providing adequate recreation facilities for our kids. So I would prioritize that over the animal control shelter in a heartbeat.
Well, what challenges us is, and a new animal control shelter, well, a larger one, a new recreation center is going to add to your operating costs that aren't in the base budget.
Right.
So the more the state does to inhibit us to raise taxes needed, the subsidy needed to finance these buildings, it becomes very challenging for us. So you have to take that into account too.
That's fair.
Not that you can't do it. It's just going to, it's going to be, you're going to have to make cuts in other areas to meet those obligations. So that recreation, that's never built into the base, the subsidy for that. Nor, like we're dealing with that with the swimming pool, right? Right now. And I haven't seen the bottom line on that, how we're going to make the moves to make that all work with whatever Corey tells me we only have 2% more money. That's going to be challenging.
Right.
What do you think, Brown?
It's a good question. They're all a lot of them I think are worthy. I don't tend to agree about a new indoor rec center in terms of putting it high priority. I'm willing to think about it, but it's lower priority for me for a couple of reasons. For one, I don't know that we can break into competing in the private sphere in that way. There are already a lot of private gym spaces, and I don't know that the city is well suited to break into that market without great cost to ourselves. So I don't know that we're the best able to provide that at the lowest cost for people. And I think it got a pretty resounding rejection from voters when we put it up for a vote. And that's been years, right? In terms of the Healthy Life Center. But it felt to me like the citizens were saying that wasn't a priority to them at the time. So
would you prioritize, and what kind of funding mix, Steve, that's what Steve's looking for?
Yeah, the animal control shelter I do think is important. I don't know that I would take any funding source off the table for that. It's probably okay to have a diverse portfolio of funding you might draw from. So I'm not opposed to thinking about any of the methods. I think the development of the park is interesting. It was when we went and toured it. I think there's a lot of just natural beauty right off the bat without a lot of development needed to. I mean, obviously we'd need some. I don't mean that, but it's not like we need to be slapping buildings in left and right there. And so I'm hopeful that we can, take that piece by piece and not have it be a huge expense all at once. Because it's already just a beautiful park. Anyway,
Amber? Oh, sorry.
that's about
Go
all
ahead.
I think.
Amber, thoughts?
I do think the animal shelter is a priority. I think it has been for a number of years. You walk in there and it's very clear to see that we are desperately in need of a new space. However, I do agree with Tim that an indoor recreation center is a priority. I think there's a difference between a recreation center and a gym. And although I loved the Healthy Life Center, I think those two pieces can easily be separated, and we are so far behind the mark when it compares to even cities much, much smaller than us in terms of having a recreation space for youth activities primarily. It seems like there's a new announcement every other week from some community that's building or is opening an indoor recreation facility, and it's sad that we don't have one here.
How about mix of funding?
I don't think you take fundraising off the table for the animal shelter. I think you need to be very reasonable about what's realistic so that you don't get into a situation where you're trying to make up for that later. But to your point, I think it hurts a fundraising campaign if you go in up front and say you're funding the entire thing. So, yeah.
Neil, you want to add anything to Jimmy?
In terms of the priorities, I would also suggest that the development of the park in West Ames be balanced in some way with that new indoor recreation center. I do think that the city has needed for a long time a place for other types of sporting events to happen for young people. It's good that we have a better working relationship maybe right now with the school district, but it would still be nice to have something that we could control. In terms of the animal control shelter, I was just trying to figure out some kind of a number. And so I was just looking at what percentage of Fitch was fundraised. And I know there perhaps wasn't a target for that, but it looks like it was almost 30%. And I'm not suggesting that, but I am okay with coming up with some number of fundraising that we want to do for the animal control shelter. I don't think 30% is reasonable though.
Yeah.
So.
And would the three of you agree that would you do a mix of bond issue, cash on hand, and fundraising, or would you try and do just cash on hand and donations? I think Steve's just trying to get some
For
kind
what? For the shelter?
for shelter.
I would not go to bond for anything if I had to.
Okay.
If we have money.
Okay. Rachel, what do you think?
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo a lot of what's already said. I think animal control shelter is number one priority of these five for me. And yeah, I wouldn't take any funding mechanism off the table either. Or, count on a specific number of donations, before we've tried to go out and get that. So.
And try and avoid a bond issue also if you can.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Does that give you what you need?
So you'd be willing to deplete that capital improvement fund if you had to deplete it all for this project, plus donations, whatever it is, $5 million or whatever. You have $3.5 million. We may grow that now. We may be able to add to it, but you deplete that for this project. Okay. Well, so consensus, no.
Try and avoid.
Property tax.
My sense, try and avoid a bond issue if you can for the animal
Okay.
shelter.
The other strategy is, and Corey can correct me if I am wrong. The new law, it's fairly recent. You can only have bond issues now in November of each year. Some referendum, excuse me.
Right.
Yeah. Correct. So the intent here is not to put another one of those other projects up for a referendum in November. So that would be we deal with next year other projects. Is that okay? Are the ones that don't need geo bonds. If we had cash on hand, then we can move ahead. You know what I'm saying? No, I'm just telling you, you'll probably see just one project right now in the CIP.
Because we did already set aside some funds for a study at the park in West Ames. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
that's what we will get. We will get the conceptual
Going
costs.
to
Fire
start-
station number 2, and
Yeah.
maybe this year you want to do a conceptual cost for a new rec center,
I think that'd be good.
right? So then we
Just
get then the
ideas,
budget.
yeah.
Then we'll have it there and with some operating costs. And next year you'll be able to prioritize the remaining
Right.
ones, right?
Yeah, I like that.
Makes sense.
Mhm.
One point to clarify, on an indoor rec center, there are no private sources of that kind of facility. So,
Well, you mean there's no private gym space?
correct. That's not a thing.
Hmm.
And so,
A lot of churches have it now around here, but
Mhm.
gyms,
Yeah.
not private.
so this would just be a major thing we could do to help our youth in the community.
Well, and again, it's a fight for workforce. It's a fight for, attracting families. And I think that there would be a large number of people in the community who have, in particular, kids that would be very, very supportive, very excited about this. I think the key's going to be where it's going to be located, is easy, access, what's going to be provided, and how can we be creative to offer a wide variety. So there's a lot of conversation to go on, on that. But I think that for the sake of tonight, did you get what you were looking for to start with at this point? Sure. I'm just asking a question. If you need more, ask.
I did.
Okay. We're here to serve. No, no.
Please don't yell at me if I don't meet your needs.
Oh, I can't guarantee you that.
I want to point out, I agree with Raman on the park in West Ames. The big challenge there is there's no parking. So even if you wanted to go there, it's very difficult. So I think with some modest investment in parking infrastructure and some work to create some basic, very light trail system, you could utilize that space in pretty creative ways without a huge investment.
Yeah, remember, you have to have a small parking lot on the north.
Right.
Remember that? And we're going to have to, if you approach from the south, we have to wait until the development occurs. So it's not going to be a massive parking lot. It'll be a smaller parking lot, right?
Right.
But you get people into that, I understand. But we'll ultimately have to have a larger parking lot to the south. Remember that big open area, which more of the organized. But you're right. We can get it going. All right. It helps us.
All right.
Last slide before we get to Brian and Paul. We have Steve and Kelly been working with a developer related to housing on the north side of town, west of Hyde Avenue. The developer has made a request for infrastructure improvements between $1.5 and $2 million. Alternatively, there's an option to open up maybe approximately 125 residential lots with the lining of the sewer in Memorial Park. At this point, I think the preliminary estimate on that project is about $200,000. So I think we're looking for feedback in terms of whether that's an investment the city wants to make or how we go about planning for some of those projects.
So this is the Borgmeyer property. They're looking for us to start picking up street improvements, pick up water, sewer, pick up utility buyouts, rural water buyouts. It'd be something that we've never done before, but I think one way we can handle this is we could bond. It's really slipping a sewer line, which normally we wouldn't pay for, but it increased that capacity. That 125 or that 200,000 could get us 125 residential lots in 1 year. And then Corey's going to tell us how much ARPA fund we have over. So we might have, how much?
$2.5 million maybe.
Yeah. So maybe you want to use it all for that, for them. So we don't have to worry about putting it in the budget and still can respond to them from a balance, is what I'm saying.
Okay.
But I just don't think we have that all negotiated, in the next month. So I think we can help out there. And then we're also talking to the developer at Hayden's Preserve, and we'll be having more discussions with them. And there's a possible arrangement we can make where we special assess a bank stabilization project, which will help reduce their costs or put revenue in their pocket that makes the project even more viable. So the trouble is I need to know if we're going to issue bonds. I need to know this, by February. So we're going to have to move really quickly on this to get this all done. So it's kind of an extraordinary steps without being too crazy here, but yet to try to promote opening more land, so more housing. And I think we'll come up with some recommendations for you, but I want you to be aware of what's being discussed.
Well, using ARPA funds is kind of a creative way of maybe trying to not set a precedent. I mean, it's a one-time infusion of cash coming into the city, but it would be interesting to find out how many housing units, what's the best way to get the maximum amount of housing units out of. So for example, if I'm making this up, if we can use $2.5 million in one project, you can get 400 houses, but in this one over here, you get 550, or you can get 400, but 150 townhomes.
Right.
I mean, it just seems like if we're going to use that kind of money,
Yeah.
how can we best leverage that to really get things going? But when someone comes back and says, well, you did this. Well, no, yeah, it was a one-time amount of money we had. And we talked to everybody who is interested in it and see what we can do. And, but it's all about yield because we need more housing. I think Kelly said this afternoon, we had like 56 housing starts this year, I think. I mean, it's just, it's so small compared to what our overall 2040 plan need is showing, like 300 some housing units. That's not single family, it's townhomes, maybe other stuff. Anyway.
So when you talk to the developer, the issues you could talk about is not only variety of housing, single family and condos and stuff, but also do you want to have a certain expectation of housing costs?
Right, target house prices,
Target
right.
house prices.
Right.
So that's why it's going to be a little more complicated to get this done in a month. But I think we'll have some money in ARPA. Now, the other argument would be, well, now ARPA can be used for your animal control shelter. Your animal control shelter. So you could use it there if you didn't want to use it for this. So I want to make sure you understand this, and there are other uses ARPA can be used for.
Yeah.
So I think we would use it for this kind of thing. We've used ARPA to open up all those other areas. Remember, water and sewer lines in accordance with a 240 plan. So it would seem consistent to use that money for this. But I just want to tell you, you could use it for the West Park 2 development. So
How
Kind of
does
warning.
lining the sewer add to
capacity.
capacity?
Well, I'm not an engineer, so I refuse to answer on the grounds that
The more
But
I
I'll
look
bring on
at it, the more I
engineer.
think that just seems very odd that adds to capacity.
Well, ask Corey, he can tell you.
Yeah, I'll give
Friction.
you the math later, but what I understand is
friction.
that, it's the friction related to the sewer. That's
Okay.
what
I was
Kelly told me.
thinking
So if that's wrong, he's.
You blame him.
Yeah, that's right.
I thought it had something to do with the porous nature of many of our sewer pipes and that the lining would, I don't know.
Mayor, this is the first time we've discussed the idea of tying the ARPA funding to some kind of expectation for the city. I am not excited about ARPA money going to a very low density project. And so if we assume these are public dollars that we have to do a cost benefit analysis, I am very interested in maximizing the number of units. I think it's hard.
Variety, yeah.
I think it's hard for us up here to dictate price points of properties. But what we can do is, in essence, have developers compete for those dollars and say, look, we've got this much and we want to leverage it the most that we can. And so that's going to incentivize townhouses or condos or some kind of higher density rather than just a super low density project. I think if you're going to ask for public dollars, we should ask the question, what is the public getting in exchange for that?
Right.
So that was extremely helpful.
Yeah. I think also timeline. We want to see it happen quickly. So it's like, no, it's not like you can eke out 3 or 4 houses a year. It's more or less how fast can you get it done, what are you going to commit to if we're going to go ahead and use that and basically try and prime the pump and get things going. And if we can use that as a building block for more development, even all the better from the standpoint of it becoming an integral piece that would be extendable to the next one and the next one as well.
And I'm hoping we get feedback on the Baker subdivision. Again, if I could have done this differently, this has not been a fast project. Right. They still have very, very few houses, and we've got to see houses coming out of the ground in that subdivision. So,
well, and in fairness, we were constrained by the fact that the federal funding says you can't sell market rate lots until you have a LMI lot. So now finally with this generated, I think it's going to free up and open up all those, I think. I'm not sure what the criteria is when it is.
Right. I think you'll see the next council meeting in January. we'll have a different strategy to deal with the
Beautiful. I don't mean to take us off track, but it just.
both
Oh,
properties.
oh,
Remember, we
housing
had the Harrison
development.
properties too.
That's in our wheelhouse right now.
Yep, we're going in all those directions.
Corey, get this meeting back on order, would you?
Well, I'll turn it over to Pa then.
All right, there you go. Well, and I mean, is
What about
everyone comfortable with Steve and Corey looking at different ways of using funding and try and see what we can do with using that money for housing, residential?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I
Well,
think you
are
got
we going to come back to Corey, or is Corey's?
No,
Corey
Corey's
done?
leaving.
Yeah, my time's coming up. No.
So before we shift away
Sure.
from you, just real quickly.
Yep.
So the federal government is looking at trimming $2 trillion from federal spending.
Yeah.
Can you give us real quickly the percentage of our budget that is dependent on federal dollars?
Well, I think it varies year to year. Steve had mentioned that there was some concern about that. So we complete as part of our annual comprehensive financial report, our act for, it's called the CFA, and it identifies every source of federal funds that we utilize for the past year. So if I don't have the numbers exactly in front of me, but I think last year for 23-24, it was $27 million. So I think that's roughly probably 10%-ish, maybe a little bit higher than that. But I think what I would also say to that is, we did a lot of SRF projects, and those have a federal component because it's a federally subsidized rate. So, there may be alternatives to that source. We may pay a higher rate, but it's still there are still other options out there. So I would suggest that if we wanted to take a comprehensive look at that, we would look at probably our upcoming budget and largely focus on some of our operational costs, I think. So.
And it does vary. For example, SIRIDE is very dependent on federal dollars.
Right.
And I worry we would be able to maintain SIRIDE without those federal subsidies.
Yeah.
And final question.
Mhm.
This discussion about the budget constraints that we're facing, how would you articulate the incentive that it places on the city to increase our tax base? So we're always wanting to increase the tax base, but given the parameters the legislature is giving us, I feel like there's even a greater incentive to really be intentional to build our tax base. Would you disagree with that?
I think there's been a lot of discussion about the upcoming legislative session and some of the limitations that may be placed upon cities, and I think there's an understanding, at least from some of the people that are speaking, that there may be a cap on total collections, and in that scenario, any form of growth doesn't benefit. It actually is detrimental because we're required to serve additional citizens that we don't receive any revenue for. If that comes to fruition, cities growth will be very intentional, and in all likelihood, any incentives that we were talking about in terms of residential housing that require additional services will probably be under consideration. So in the current model, sure, we would focus on growth, and there's a way that our growth could benefit us. But I think the discussions that we're seeing preliminary in the upcoming session is that it's a complete cap. And in that case, the cities that are growing the most are the ones that are penalized the most.
So that is the first time I've heard of an overall cap. So I was framing this as a cap on our ability to tax our existing base. And so that meant expanding the base to create a bigger pool of properties that are paying for our services. So that's extremely disheartening.
Yeah, I mean, under the current system, we would want to be in that top tier every year. We'd want 6+% growth every single year. It's probably not feasible without significant revaluation growth in certain years. But I mean, that would be the goal, is to have significant growth. But that's not. I think there's a lot to be done, I think, in the first quarter of 2025, and we'll know more at the conclusion of this session.
Well, we'd want to be in that top tier if the current system stays in place.
Yeah, excuse me, yes.
As you said, if they go ahead and one of the islands for tax relief are looking at, they're proposing, and they're lobbying hard, a 2% hard cap on all revenue growth, including bond issue, everything. Everything is just capped, essentially.
The Register ran an editorial a couple days ago lauding the state's reductions in government and reducing the tax burden, and then said that cities, local governments should watch that, but gave not a single recommendation for how cities would do this. And so I am very, very concerned about the future. If that's what they're putting in the mix, it's going to kill cities.
Well, yeah, it's something that are floating. There's a lot of things, a lot of balloons are floating around down there right now. And one of them is that, and there's other ones as well too. So
Thanks.
it's just, yeah. We'll know. We'll be a lot more have a lot more insight in about 45 to 60 days probably in terms of what's really getting and having traction down there. So.
All right, ASSET. So ASSET stands for the Analysis of Social Services Evaluation Team. Try to say that really fast 3 times. But this is the process that we use to bring funders together to promote the coordination of human services planning and to assess what human services needs we have in the community. And we have a board who helps us with this process. And so that board is made up of 22 members in the community. And this board is really empowered to help us do the work of evaluating what our community needs, evaluating what agencies are providing out there, and to make funding recommendations to the funders of what services to purchase. So the funders this year include the city, the county, United Way, and ISU student government. I do want to give a huge shout out to Aiden, who is in the audience here, who is one of our board members. He's managed to stick with us through the meeting to this point. So thank you, Aiden. He's one of our new members this year. And Aiden and his peers have a lot of work ahead of them in the next month, really, after the holidays. They'll be getting together to really deliberate through the budget requests that came forward, to talk through what funding recommendations to do. They've already done some visits to the agencies, and then their recommendations will be brought forward to you, City Council, in late January for your final consideration. Once our entire city budget is approved in April-ish, after that, we will come back with contracts for the council to approve the agencies that we do move forward with funding. One of the things that I will say is that this year we had 29 agencies who did submit a request for funding. The most notable one is that we do have one new agency, which is Prairie Flowers, nonprofit nature-based early childhood center here in Ames. I've put up there on the screen for you just the amount of what it would come up to if you did an increase this year. Last year, we recommended a 5% increase. I've outlined the options up there. This year, we would recommend the 5% increase as well. I heard this morning that the Board of Supervisors also approved a 5% increase, and last week, United Way approved a 3% increase. With that said, one of the things that we are also recommending to you is that with any increased dollars, and should there be any unallocated dollars through the volunteers process, we would like to ask that that funding be designated towards continuing to coordinate and work with agencies to prevent and assist the unsheltered individuals, and also to work with agencies on just improving efficiency. I think, as we've talked about, there's a lot of restrictions on what our budget could be going forward. And so we think that this investment might be good just to take a closer look at where can we provide some efficiencies. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys have.
Can you just elaborate? You and I have talked a little bit about through your homeless several meetings, became pretty apparent that most agencies don't know what other agencies are doing in the city, and or where they're located or how to contact them. And a lot of them have similar challenges that they've expressed also. So what Pa and I have been talking about is, I think the city is going to have to take the lead, or Asset needs to take the lead in terms of having someone, either as a contract individual for a year or 2 years, but to go out and really get a good handle on what these agencies do, get a matrix put together so they're clear on what's transpired, where they're located, to try and help people and find out what those needs are, but using a portion of the asset funds to fund that. It's not adding a position or doing a contract under a general fund. And then hopefully in a year or two, that could be turned over either to an asset agency to take care of that. Maybe it gets built in permanently. But the point is that it just seems that was one of the things that you found as a shortcoming, was people just really don't understand. And I think someone's going to have to take the lead to get others informed, updated, providing information. I think that's something what you're going to be looking at with the RFP too, right? In terms of trying to create that. So
Yeah, correct.
Are you suggesting that housing providers don't know what other housing
No,
providers are
no.
doing, or that
asset agencies are.
like the Boys and Girls Club doesn't know what Salvation Army is doing?
I think what you're alluding to is the fact that we've been convening service providers around the homelessness issue. And through those discussions, we've brought, I think I've mentioned, we've had a huge outturn of folks who have been attending that. And there's just been a lot of conversation around not being aware that one agency is doing X, Y, or Z, or where their limitations are. And so we've really been able to facilitate those conversations. And so I think it's been very successful. We're in the process right now of updating a matrix that will outline who provides what services. And I think the intent is for this work to continue and to use asset funds to continue supporting it.
Okay. It's just interesting because, I mean, I've been in many meetings over the years with human service agencies. United Way facilitates a lot of those conversations. Every year it's required that we all attend some of those meetings. Almost all the information is available on the asset website. So it's surprising to me because almost all the asset agencies have been around for many years. And a lot of us work very closely together. And so it doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Well, and it could be there's some weak links here that we can identify, and doesn't take someone. It's a position, but the point is that the other thing, as we talked about for years, is that if we go up 5%, it may get to the point where we can't go up any further. And we talked about we're going to have to look for efficiencies. And are there agencies that are doing duplicative services? Are there things that they're doing better? They can work together with others. The whole idea is to try and make sure we're getting as much service for those who really need it with the dollars that are available, and not assume that we can always continue to keep on going up and up and up. And we have, how much for the people you were asking? The increase was,
130.
so they're asking for $530,000 of increases. A lot of money, and where is all it going? And it's also using a United Way scorecard. But anyway, we're just trying to figure out how can we really optimize and really meet the needs of the people who are right now currently either unhoused or that are challenged. I think that we revealed a little bit of a something could be helped along to really help those who really are in need and get that communication going. What that looks like exactly, that's where Paul comes in. She'll figure it all out.
That's right.
So the mayor mentioned the scorecard, and I was going to ask this too.
Yeah.
So we've had that scorecard now for how long? Do you know, Amber?
2 or 3 years, isn't it?
Probably, well, with the city, we're probably in our third or fourth year.
So one of the goals of the scorecard was to help us to have some tools for understanding what we're getting in exchange for these dollars. Is that something that we're utilizing in these recommendations at some point?
Yeah, absolutely. So the asset volunteers have access to all the scorecards and all the data that's being presented from all the agencies. And they use that as one of the pieces of information when they're formulating their funding recommendations.
Okay. Is that something that's shared with council or something that's just with the asset?
I don't know if it's been historically shared with the council. If there's some pieces of it, it all rolls up into United Way scorecard that's available on their website now.
Okay.
I think for confidentiality purposes, we don't, publish all of it out there just because there's just a lot of, and there's also just a lot of metrics. I think people will get lost in the number of metrics there. So
Yeah, there's quantitative and qualitative
Yeah.
data in there. We report stories, actual stories of people who are served, and we upload pictures, and in addition to statistics on how many people are served in particular areas, and whether things are trending up or down in particular areas. So it just depends on the agency.
Some of the numbers, when I look at this, seem really skewed. And is that just because we have several what I might consider super users who have ballooned their budget requests, and that's thrown off the entirety of the request picture?
yeah, I don't know that anybody has really ballooned their request, but I think when you add a new agency, there's always new requests with that. So I think Prairie Flowers had, 24,000 in there. Primary healthcare is also proposing 2 new services. So the community clinics and the service coordination, which is a pretty significant amount, about $110,000 there. So when you add up, I think that we saw a lot where there was maybe like a 3% increase as well. So when you add that up amongst all the 29 agencies, you get to a fairly large increase.
Well, one agency wasn't funded last year, and when you throw their request in, that also, to your point, Gloria, and to yours, Paul, that can tend to skew it or make it seem significantly higher.
So what we need from you is direction on what total funding amount the asset team should be working with.
So you're looking for a percent increase?
Correct. Yep.
Staff recommend 5? Is that
Yes.
Yeah, I would move that we increase it by 5%.
Second.
Okay.
So I'm just, as a sounding board on this, Steve, as you think about our overall budget proposal for the city, what is your projecting for increase for our city budget?
I haven't seen all the numbers yet. I'll be working on that next.
But in our last budget,
Well,
it was
3.5
Yeah.
from taxes. Remember, it's mitigated by the state action. So I think we requested 3.5% more in tax money.
And so let's just play out that maybe it would be something comparable. And that's really due in large part to the staff in keeping our expenses
Right.
down. And
Excuse me, it won't be this year because you have to add on to that now the deficit for the swimming pool. Remember?
That's right.
So it's Keith was trying to tell you it's going to be higher. And that's why it'll be very challenging, whatever the state does, whatever that state formula, how it hits us.
So I think as a general posture, generosity is good, but I think that we've got some pretty significant budget constraints. And I think that if we were shooting for somewhere in the vicinity of what our own city budget, what we're going to pay our people in terms of increases, I think the 3.5% would be more in line with that.
I will say there are different sources of funding. This comes out of local
Right.
option, not
Understand.
property tax money.
All right, those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Motion carried. Anything else that you would like from us tonight, Pa?
No, thanks.
All right, thank you.
You have slides for?
No slides for you.
Oh, that's fine.
Pa gave me her slides.
You'll just wing it, Brian.
We'll wing it. Okay. So the next item that we need some city council instruction on is regarding the Commission on the Arts requests. So the Commission on the Arts receives requests from arts agencies throughout the community, and they provide funding in the form of grants for annual activities and operations. And then they reserve a pot of money that is used for unique opportunities that may come up throughout the year. That money is distributed through a fall and spring special project grant program. There were 22 applications for next fiscal year from agencies for annual grant funding. The Commission on the Arts has held its hearings with those agencies where they presented a justification for their request and they responded to questions from the commissioners. And now the commission is awaiting the council's instruction in terms of what pot of money is available to distribute to those agencies, along with a reserve that would be set aside for the special project grants. The total of the grant requests this year was $288,616. And that is just shy of a 20% increase. There is a small typo in the report. The dollar amount increase is $47,685 of additional money requested compared to the amount that's been allocated for the current year. This time last year, the City Council approved a 5% increase in the pot of available money. Staff does not generally recommend a particular amount, so it's up to the council as to what you would like to set aside and give instruction to CODA for the pot of money that's made available. Unlike other programs, when the council sets the dollar figure for CODA funding, CODA uses all of the money. So even if it determines that some requests are not worthy of the entirety of funding, CODA will take all of that money and put it either towards the annual grants or into the special project reserve. So we have a couple of different options for you outlined in the report, so you can see the implications of those dollar amounts. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
So 5%, according to the report, shows about a $12,000 increase over last year. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So the magnitude of the increase is pretty small compared to asset for 5%.
Right. We're talking
Yeah.
$200,000 and change, not $2 million and change.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Is there any discussion or is there a motion regarding percent increase from over last year?
I would move we support a 5% increase from last year.
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried. Next.
All right, the next item is regarding the outside funding requests. So these are requests that are received from organizations throughout the community where the requests don't fit within any of the existing programs that the City Council has structured. So they are not human services requests, they are not arts agency requests generally, they are other things. So these requests are financed out of two different funding sources. Hotel Motel Tax Fund is used for some of these requests. Specifically, it's used for workforce initiatives that are contracted with the Ames Regional Economic Alliance. And Hotel Motel Tax is used to support waivers of parking regulations for events that occur in downtown and campus town. So those two are considered separately. All of the rest of the requests are financed out of the local option sales tax fund. The request to the local option sales tax fund this year was a 17.7% increase, $363,667. There were two new requesters this year. One was YWCA and the other was the Ames Foundation. We have provided some narrative outlining what those requests were for, and some key points related to those and other requests. If you exclude those new requests, the increase to the local option sales tax fund is about 9.6%. So those new requests do have a large impact because of the dollar amount and because of the total dollar amount of the requests. So we are looking for, again, the council's direction as to the amount of money that should be made available for staff to recommend funding awards for each of those agencies, each of those requests. We're not seeking the council's review right now of the merits of each of these requests. We're just looking for the total dollar amount. We did, however, provide copies of the applications in your materials. So if you wanted to review those, you can peruse those also. I'm not sure that we're in a position just yet to answer detailed questions about each of those proposals, but if there are any, we can certainly investigate those with the agencies.
Brian, can you remind council what the criteria was that you used to evaluate those that was approved by the council?
There is a set of criteria the council has approved. I can't recall it off the top of my head, but I believe parts of it include services that would otherwise be provided by the city, likely at a higher cost. Services that have a broad-based appeal to the community.
That's two.
And services that are unique.
I don't know about that one.
Something like that. Unique and interesting.
I think you're bluffing now.
I think there's something like that in the third one.
But there is a set of criteria that the council would approve that
yes,
staff uses as a guideline when we come back. It'll
yes,
be based on that those criteria.
Yes. So we're seeking council approval for the percentage increase from the current local option allocation of $309,035.
Is there a motion to suggested amount?
I would move we support a 5% increase.
I'll second.
Move second. Any discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried.
And then for the hotel motel fund supported portion of these outside funding requests, staff anticipates that we will plug into the budget a $10,000 reserve for these waivers of parking regulations for district-wide free parking for events. And then we will evaluate the Ames Regional Economic Alliance request. This year, the request increased after a number of years at $15,000 each year. That request increased to $20,000. Now, again, this is just the workforce initiatives portion of what the Economic Alliance requests from the city of Ames. There's a separate portion that's substantially larger that goes to the Regional Economic Alliance for providing economic development services for the city. So we're not seeking any direction on those pieces. We will evaluate those and bring you information for budget wrap up in February.
Anything else?
Nope.
I might just mention that this, the Ames Foundation is asking this request for creating a quote dinky line to and from campus to downtown, and having this is something that maybe Emily can comment on at the end of the meeting. But I think that there was some feedback and maybe some interest from the ISU student government regarding that, in terms of having a direct route to and from that might spur on more information or more interest in the downtown area also. Not to try and influence, not trying to influence the decision, but it's interesting, and it might have some feedback from others regarding that. You good to go?
Nothing further.
All right, Corey, you got anything else?
I think the only thing we had was a directive from the June 11th, 2024 council meeting about youth program funding. And so there was a directive at that time to bring that back, that question back. I think it was in relation to scholarships for the youth delegation for Kosher City. And so we're just wanted to make sure that that item was at least had an option to be addressed, and we received any direction on that.
Yeah, that's on page 185 of the packet under youth programming funding. Yeah.
Yes.
Do you need some direction from council on whether they want to go ahead and support that, or what do you suggest?
You know, I'm not sure after reviewing the meeting, I'm not sure that there was any specific directive given. I think it was an option to have a conversation about potential funding for some sort of program related, I think, to the Sister Cities program.
I think, Rachel, you noted in our meeting that they hadn't really plugged that. AIPCA didn't plug it in for their request, so I don't know if we want to pursue that or not.
Yeah, I think if AIPCA is interested in getting more youth that don't have the funds to go on this trip involved, I would hope that they would put it into their annual budget. And I know their next trip with the students isn't until July of 2026. So maybe this is something that, could go in the budget next year, or they could consider it in the future. But I think in light of all of our other budget issues, I don't know that we should consider another youth programming initiative or scholarship fund right now.
And I'm okay delaying if that wasn't there and this is not the year. I do think it would make sense to perhaps in a situation like this where it would provide an opportunity for a student who might not otherwise have that chance to go, and it is something that is important to the city, that we could do that, but I'm okay not doing it this year.
Okay. Thanks for bringing it up, though. Anything else?
That's it.
Well, do we distribute any kind of correspondence we received on the budget sent out to them?
Yeah, we have the meetings from the minutes from the town budget meeting included in the packet, as well as the communication we received before that meeting.
Thank you very much, all four of you. Appreciate your feedback and
A lot of work still yet to be
Yeah,
done. It's
nice.
a puzzle that's not completed yet, and we don't see the end point right now, but it'll come together, but it's gonna.
yeah. Well, it's helpful to have. It's helpful to have
Get it
the,
all figured out.
That's right. It's helpful to have all that summary put together for us so we can kind of digest it, though. Thank you. All right, disposition of communications to council is next, and there's just two items. One is a letter from Winkle Black and Dodge regarding the incentives for all electric homes that was brought up during.
Item 18.
And the other thing was, it's just an update from Brian regarding downtown master plan update. So, reported governing body, anything from Discover Ames?
Nope, no meeting.
Economic Alliance?
Haven't had a meeting.
Tim, Story County?
Nothing.
Ames Transit?
No meeting.
Okay, council comments. Emily?
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
I just wanted to apologize I wasn't able to be there tonight. Something came up with my finals kind of last minute. So I will see you guys all after the winter break. Unless you're on Cyrus, then I will see you on Thursday. But I don't really have anything for you guys tonight. I'll be working with Martin and Quinn going into our new session for the Senate on some thoughts and projects and anything that they have for me from them or any of the other senators going into our new session. So I might have some stuff for you guys when we get back from winter break, but for now I don't really have anything.
All right, thank you. Gloria?
I just want to wish everyone happy holidays. I hope you have a restful break before the next meeting.
Congratulations to graduating seniors. We lose a bunch of our population here this time of year, and glad you made Ames your home. And just want to commend the staff tonight. This was one of those meetings where we sort of pop the hood and talk about some really important issues. And I think it demonstrates the depth of thoughtfulness that goes into these major long-range decisions. So I just have sort of a super proud moment of our staff and just the work that they do for us.
Thank you. They're good people.
Great.
Nothing tonight.
Nothing for me.
Nothing for me.
I'll just echo what Gloria said. We, on behalf of City Council, wish everybody a happy holidays and safe travels where your people are going, and Happy New Year. And we will see you again on January 14th. So with that, entertain a motion to adjourn for the year.
Move we adjourn.
Second?
All right, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.
Goal setting.